I was having to do this. Couple times I was trying to send you a map by the way.
This building 30 years ago. Years, I looked at it
Morning, folks.
I had seen that.
Morning, everybody. Great to see everyone here in person. Great to see everyone here in person. I'm sure everybody's excited for this. Hopefully this is a model we can rely on most going forward. First this morning, I want to welcome the community's members to the board. We have Case Long. Case, wave to everybody. Look, Case has been very involved in a lot of the committee work that should be going on later today. And then along with Case Long, this is the table, I guess, over there. Yeah. We have Corey Matthew. Corey. Well, guys. Also been very involved in a lot of that work. So great to have you both here. We have a new member who is not with us today, Scott Farr. We do have a proxy though. Dave, thank you for being here today. Scott has been also involved in a lot of the work going into the strategic plan. So really joins the board with a good understanding of where we are and what we're trying to do going forward. Probably folks all here will recall the last year's legislative session, not most recent last. We created, the legislature created the special oversight committee on workforce expansion and development, known as SWDB. SWDB was created to help, or Vermont, according to the legislature, let's see, Act 183 stated Vermont needs a statewide workforce development, training, and education system which all Vermonters who want to work and all employers who want to work and connect. So the SWDB has been partnering with consultant PCG, which is helping to do an analysis of governance and the systems and everything that goes into this, understanding sort of the lay of the land, and then we'll be making recommendations to the SWDB, which will in turn make recommendations to the legislature in the administration coming up later next session. So the update on where that process is, just real quickly. This spring, the consultants conduct interviews and stakeholders to map where we are in the state. And then a week from Monday, the committee will meet in person in Montpelier to discuss some of the recommended models from a national scan that they've done after doing what's the status here, comparing us to other small, rural, less dense communities in states than are so often the case for these larger systems. So then there'll be some revisions based on the feedback over the course of the summer, and the final report with models anticipated will be presented to the committee September 1st. That's going to include the pros and cons of each, and let the committee really, absorb that and sift that through. And then the consultants will be available for legislative testimony through the fiscal year. So that's sort of where that's at. It's a really great time for new members to be joining the board. A great time to be on the board because we have this these two paths, the strategic plan, which we're going to be looking at later, SOCWED. These aren't being done in isolation. These are done in intention along parallel paths. You're going to come together. We'll have the data, recommendations from SOCWED, and then we'll have the strategic plan, which we'll be looking at later today. Those two things can come together. And, we're through COVID, right? We're ready as a board to, again, start taking action, shaping the future of the system. These two things are going to do a great job. Let's do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tori, who is going to lead today's meeting. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone. Just a couple of logistics. The bathrooms are down all the way at the end of the hallway here. I think men's room is on this side, men's room is on this side, just so if you need anything. And we have an abundance of food from Red Hen in Middlesex, so please eat this. This is thoughtfully provided by the Vermont Department of Labor, so please eat your taxpayers' money's worth. So I will keep this portion brief, but just to run through the agenda, we did not read every single email Abby has sent you, which I don't blame you for doing. In the beginning section today, we're gonna have presentations from the National Guard and Vermont Works for Women. We'll take a little break, and then we will basically dive into the strategic plan that we've all been working on for the past year. Oh, thank you, Abby. So during this section, please ask lots of questions. Our presenters worked really hard to put this together. And then we'll really dive into kind of the meat and potatoes of the strategic plan, but we're very excited. One incentive to either A, have a very quick meeting or stay for the whole meeting is we do have also lunch for you all afterwards. It looks very good. So do with that what you will. But I will introduce our first group. We've got the Vermont National Guard here to take it away.
Thanks, Lori. Good morning, everybody. So good morning. I'm Major General Greg Knight from Vermont's Adjutant General. I retain the distinction of being the only legislatively elected Adjutant General in the United States. So I've gone from 35 years of military service to now being a politician. Anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Abby, thank you very much for setting everything up. I want to talk through some very quick notes today. Can we pull up that new slide? But before I get to that, welcome Justin Davis. I know you're listening online. Not familiar with Justin. He's a retired colonel with our Army National Guard, one of my best friends in the Guard. So it's really awesome to have somebody on the inside. So good business for us. But I want to talk a little bit about our Guard. Fortunately, my little over 4 years now in this job, when I was talking to Monica, I've come to the realization that we remain probably one of the best kept secrets in Vermont. And that's despite our response to COVID. That's despite the 3.2 million meals with the Vermont Food Bank 2 summers ago, administering 25,000 vaccines, millions of items of PPE packaged and shipped to all of our providers across the state, deployments, all of that. And people don't know us. So that's why I'm here today. I think we collaboratively could probably do a better job working together. I was talking to Mike about it earlier. What I envision, if we did this right, I'll get to the why. If we could make Vermont literally a marketing juggernaut when it comes to attracting talent here from the prior service military. I'll get to that momentarily. How many folks understand what the Guard is and does, besides Justin Davis? Mike, nice. Yeah, and I'm remiss. So Lieutenant Colonel Bob Burke and Sergeant Major Kate Savell, they're my recruiting team. They're tip of the spear for us. If anybody's in uniform, you can probably thank somebody called a recruiter. You got us here. So I've been doing this for actually probably longer than some of you have been alive. 4 years on July 11th. So pretty interesting career. Anyway, who can tell me about the Guard? What's your perception of the Guard? Anybody online? Yes.
Well, you are here to protect, the Air National Guard is to protect our airspace and be called out for deployment as needed, I think, by the president or others. And you are the only National Guard F-35 base in the country, as I recall. And then National Guard is there in the event of emergencies or other national defense needs. And I'm forgetting who can call you guys out.
National Command Authority, so the President, Secretary of Defense.
How'd I do?
You get there.
Okay.
How many of you know that we have a dual mission? And Patricia alluded to it. We have our state mission, which is our first mission under Title 32 of US Code, which is all of our status while we're here in Vermont. So we do the COVID response. We do respond to hurricanes, wildfires, floods, Irene, for instance. We also have a Title 10 mission, which is our federal mission, which upon the authority of the National Command Authority, they will say you will mobilize and go, for instance, to European Command with our F-35s to counter Russian aggression and support our NATO air policing mission. We are the only F-35 currently operational F-35 fighter wing in the Air National Guard. It was busy. Anybody familiar with the state partnership program? If you're not, I encourage you to look it up online. Just type in National Guard State Partnership Program. This has been a program that's been in place for 30 years. Starts as a military to military relationship. We've been partners with now North Macedonia, formerly Republic of Macedonia, for 30 years. We just met with their Minister of Agriculture last week, and some Tibbetts escorted in, and a lot of stuff that goes beyond military to military. We've been partners with Senegal, their first week in April, and partners with them for 15 years. And just last spring, we signed a partnership with the Republic of Austria. A lot of other Guard states were super upset with us. Austria's in demand. So what that means is we can grow beyond military to military. Ideally, if you apply the whole of Vermont, whole of society approach to that partnership, as we're doing, it becomes things that we're all interested in. It's renewable energy, it's commerce, it's trade, it's community development, it's legislative engagement. It's all of those things, tourism, agro-tourism, all the things that Vermont does really well. My job is to facilitate that relationship. Nobody knows that. But that's really what I want to get at here. But when we talk about our recruiting challenge, I had we hosted a career fair this past Saturday. I'll be perfectly honest, I had not much expectation, talking to Monica about it. Pretty abysmal turnout. I don't know if that's because they view Camp Johnson as Area 51. It's some secret we can't go there. We're trying to lift the curtain on the Guard and get rid of this mystery because there isn't. And welcome to Frank Cody, who's one of our newest recruits. I backed him into joining. He works in the governor's office. The governor there, I just said he was thinking about it. And I said, "What, you hate America? What's wrong with you?" Anyway, we got it in. So, got a couple of slides here just to give you the scope of our problem. There's what I'm supposed to have, and then there's what we actually have, what we call paid strength. Paid strength is what gets us money, funding to do training, funding to get people qualified to do jobs. I have a delta right now in my Army National Guard, 593 vacancies, almost 600 folks. Understand, who knows that the Guard is part-time? Right, it's a part-time job for 2/3 of the force, probably a little more. We have a core group of full-time federal technicians and active Guard and Reserve that actually prepare training events, run the logistics, pay all the admin, make sure our part-time members are taken care of. That's true for both Air and Army National Guard. So just our top 10, and MOS is a military occupational specialty. That's where your focus is when you go to training. Combat arms, infantry, cavalry. I mean, that's the vacancies there. Combat medics. Understand, a lot of these are transferable skills. If you go to combat medic school, you'll come back here to Vermont and that crosswalks into an EMTP. If we send you to flight medic school, which is very competitive, you'll come back here and be certified as a paramedic. And this is true across everything we do. You go to school for us to become a diesel mechanic, guess what? You're a diesel mechanic here in Vermont. You're a truck driver, for us, you're a truck driver in Vermont. All this is transferable. These are opportunities for Vermonters. Where are they? So, get to that momentarily. I think I've got a lead in on what some of those problems are. We're growing our cyber potential here. We have a very small footprint compared to other states, but that's where it's going. They will do things here that they simply will not be able to do on the civilian side. They will be able to do classified work, which is fascinating for those cyber geeks. I am not one. I know where the on-off button is. But all of these vacancies, we can go to the next slide. My Air Guard. So vacancies, 160. Now, these are very technical skills. Munition systems, aircraft armament systems, cyber warfare operations. We've just worked with the Air National Guard Readiness Center we used to have a training mission for our cyber specialists. Now it's an operational mission. It applies to the national strategic defense. This is tied right to our F-35 fighter wing. So we're growing that. What do you get? What does Vermont get for anybody that joins our Guard? Well, you're going to get somebody with a work ethic, a clean urinalysis, a security clearance, transferable skills, and they're probably going to have their own health care. You're a single person in Vermont, you join our Guard, you can get TRICARE for about $50 a month. They want to go to college. Anybody familiar with our educational budget, our entitlement? This was huge for us. This is why we have a very close relationship with our legislature. 3.5 years ago, I asked for a legislative caucus. I've been in this job for about 6 months, and the very people that put me in the job never asked, how's it going? Okay, that's silly. That bit us in the past because we weren't very transparent. We're changing this. Now I have a caucus. We've had that for a little over 3 years now, and that's our venue to communicate to a legislative interest group that belong to a bunch of different committees, trying to tell that Guard story like this. So it's just good business for us. But from that relationship, as anybody knows, the state government, from a legislative interest group, can get legislation because they will go back to a committee of jurisdiction and say, hey, we need to work on this. Took us a while to get there. Vermont, in my view, has probably the best education entitlement in Guard Nation. So last session, we were able to get it up from the Northern Vermont University rate to the UVM in-state rate, which is great. Any one of our members can use our education entitlement in conjunction with the Montgomery Chat bill and federal tuition assistance to get their school paid for. We do that in exchange for service. It's an 8-year obligation, but it's concurrent. You do 4 years with us while you're going to school, you owe us 4. Oh, by the way, if you find a job in another state, I'm the waiver authority, you can transfer that to your gaining state. This past session, again, importance about relationships, we worked with the legislature, and I think it's passed. If there is a curriculum that doesn't reside here in Vermont, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, we will pay for that so long as you stay in our Guard. You can go to Husson University in Maine. My daughter is right now getting her nurse practitioner degree. So here's the thing about Vermont that's different from most other Guard states. It doesn't just apply to public universities. It applies to our private institutions, our Norwich University, St. Mike's, Champlain, Middlebury. That's kind of cool. So other states don't have that. You got to get that word out there. So let me get back to the reason I'm here and trying to work more collaboratively. And I don't know what the spinoff will be. I'm here for recommendations and guidance. We'll be a part of anything to try to grow this. There's a narrative out there that I think we need to overcome. And I've heard them many, many times. In Vermont, is it Ronnie? Allison, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. Another best kept secret about the Guard. Since I've been in the job, I'll take credit for some things. We put a focus on equity. We changed our officer career management plan. We didn't have one. So now, fast forward from my time in this job, we have more women in senior leadership positions in our Guard than in its history. 3.5 years ago, I had 0 women flying the F-35. Now I have Lieutenant Kelsey Flannery, who's the first woman to ever fly the F-35 in the Air National Guard. Now I haven't paraded her around because that's not what we're supposed to do. She got the job because she earned it. And oh, by the way, we circle the wagons around her because she needs to be a pilot. And I did bring her down to talk to the caucus because I think it's important that they understand what we're doing. I have 2 women who are my battalion commanders within an infantry brigade combat team. It's pretty cool. But if you look, I got all kinds of facts and figures. We grew our Army National Guard population of women last year by 4%. That's unheard of. 1% would be a win. 4%, exponential change for us. So we're going to keep doing that, and I will certainly look forward to working with you. Non-traditional role, you still do step up.
We do. It's now a new version you'll hear all about, but yes, it's
Okay.
strong.
All in. So here's the problem. How do we get at that narrative? How do we grow what we're trying to do here and get it out of Vermont? Certainly we want to influence who's in Vermont. Give you a little bit of background, and Abby, got keep time on me because I'll talk all day about the Guard. There's a prior service market out there. And when I say prior service market, those are folks who are either retiring, could come to Vermont, or they're getting out after their first term of enlistment or serving as a commissioned officer. Normally 6 years. They're probably going to be a brand new sergeant or maybe a senior first lieutenant or a captain as a commissioned officer. If I use my Fort Drum math, I don't do math in public, this one I think I got down. Fort Drum has about 15,000 soldiers. That's our nearest large military Army installation. And that's not large by Army standards. You look across the Army, there are some much larger installations. But Fort Drum has 15,000. If they have an attrition rate of say 12 or 13%, well, leaving the service for whatever reason, getting out after my first term, I'm retiring, medical, whatever it is. That's more than 2,000 soldiers a year separating from Fort Drum alone. Now, my head, multiply that across every branch of the service. And take a look at the Marine Corps, 29 Palms. Look at the Air Force, Nellis Air Force Base. Certainly the Army and all of our large installations, Norfolk Naval Station. I don't care where they come from. They can serve in our Guard and become a viable member of our workforce. If they're a retiree, they can come here and work. Our retiree numbers, military retirees, have remained static for 6 years at 39. Now, economically speaking, this is important. One, I can grow my workforce. We can grow Vermont's workforce because it's a dual career status. You're in the Guard part-time, but you're working for somebody here full-time. You're paying taxes. If you can find a house, you live here. Is that? Get it? This is a remarkable benefit because we're bringing folks with that aforementioned work ethic, that security clearance, that transferable skill. They can come here. I can go after that market. We collectively can go after that market. Give me something to market, I'll do it. I think everybody's got a piece of that. I am not a marketing expert. I'm not a complete halfwit either. No, we could do better. Anybody ever heard of the National Guard Employment Network? NGEN, because we need an acronym. That's what we do. It's a free service. While the name says National Guard, it's not actually just the National Guard. Anybody in the military can use this service. It will help you build a resume. They will align you with an employer and it costs you nothing. I can market that. So my intent is to reach out to installation commanders, division commanders, I don't care. I'll come at it from multiple directions. My team can reach out at that level. Both Army and Air, every service has a transition team. Could be in the Army, it's Soldier for Life, Transition Assistance Program. The Air Force is called an ISR, in-service recruiter. Their job is to align folks to continue service in the reserve component, the Guard or Reserve. I have a bias. I prefer the Guard. It's better. Now, the other benefit of this, if you look at data, you look across our enterprise. And by the way, I'm the vice chair of the National Guard Joint Diversity Executive Council. So we do a lot of work at the national level to grow equity and inclusion, certainly diversity. 49% of our military are minorities and women. I can go after that. We shifted our focus here in Vermont, even though the population is very small. Lawful permanent residents, new Americans, they can join our Guard. The narrative out there, oh my God, propensity to serve isn't there anymore. Well, I hear that from enough Army senior leaders or Air Guard senior leaders. I'm really starting to sound like an excuse. I don't really care that the propensity to serve isn't there. I think that's false. I think we need to educate people. They need to understand and know our Guard and what it means to serve. Because it's kind of ignorant. How about this? How about I know what the propensity to serve is? How about I talk to one of our young soldiers who came to us from Somalia at age 8. And I asked him, how'd you get here? So I came over at age 8. And he said, I couldn't believe I could have a glass of milk whenever I wanted. That's that young man's, that's his lens. And now he's a combat engineer with our Army Guard. He did his internship this past summer with a local construction firm, and he's an engineering student at UVM, and we're paying for that. That's just good business. Met 3 young soldiers this past weekend doing their soldier readiness processing, which we do once a year. All 3 were from Nepal. So their population's out there. And we're going to shift focus to make sure that we give them the same opportunity that everybody else has. So there's a lot of potential here. I defer to you on how we get after that. There's also a narrative out there that I'm working very hard to overcome. And I think this is a societal problem. Example, I was talking to Mike and Cam about it earlier. My director of military support, Lieutenant Colonel in our Air Guard, is a full-timer. His son goes to one of our high schools here. He's a junior. He's talking to his guidance counselor about, I'm thinking about joining the military. What do you think the guidance counselor said? Why would you throw your life away? Well, gosh, I've been doing this for 40 years. I joined as an E1. You can't get any lower, no college. And because of my guard, I have a bachelor's degree, I have 2 master's degrees, and now I'm a 2-star captain. And my guys will tell you, I'm certainly not the sharpest tack in the box, but if I can do it, if I can recognize that opportunity. Last I checked, isn't it a guidance counselor job? Because one of my degrees is actually in education. Isn't it a guidance counselor job to place options in front of students and parents instead of dissuading them? So there's a stigma, I think, that's still attached to the military. We're probably one of the most educated forces in Vermont. We can provide that opportunity for anybody who can join our guard. So that's really what I'm trying to do here. I've got to work at every level. We've got to really incorporate the entirety of the state of Vermont, inclusive of our legislature, inclusive of this body, to really help share that story. Because there's so much goodness that comes with service in the Guard. It is not for everybody. I'm very clear about that. It is inconvenient. I've never had a convenient for a weekend because it's on the weekend. Sometimes you do get deployed. Sometimes you have to do things and go places that our government asks us to go do. But there certainly are some benefits to doing that. You're part of something much larger than yourself. And that's really what I'm trying to go after here and get outside of Vermont, go after that prior service market globally and bring them here, give them a reason to come here. But when I hear the narrative from some legislators, and I'll be perfectly candid about it, we talk about not taxing military pensions. I come at it from a workforce development perspective. You could make Vermont a place to come. Right now, Vermont ranks 47th in best places for military retirement, which is better than last year, which was 51st. In New Hampshire, probably top 10. 48 other states have figured this out. Do I think we're special? Are we entitled to that? No. Different. You do things other people don't need to do. That's where I am. But I need more tools to bring people here. Great quality of life. We got it. No billboards. I can't make a sandwich out of that. We need to bring people here. There's so much talent to be had. We've got to make Vermont a destination. That's really my approach, because I've got to fix this. And Abby, how am I on time? Okay. And we'll do questions. So here's why this is important. The Vermont National Guard last year brought in $152 million in payroll and benefits to the state. Between now and FY26, because I'm awesome at my job and I've got a great relationship with the delegation, we've got $26 million in military construction coming here, inclusive of a brand new 12,000 square foot, $4.7 million family readiness center to take care of our veterans and their families. I'm all about it. But imagine if I have 152 in my crippled state, if I filled every vacancy, I bet we're talking 200 million. And all the potential that that workforce brings to us. And all those kids that'll come off and go to school. So I think this term is called GOBIEs. Go by General Officer Bright Ideas. I have all kinds of bright ideas. So one of my bright ideas was, hey, which is probably a question for you. How many of our colleges and universities have links to the Vermont Air and Army National Guard on their websites? How to pay for school? Now, roll the dice on this one. How many high schools have a link? I'm guessing probably none. So that's kind of the stuff I think we can focus on. I would really like to educate folks, but I can't educate the folks that don't want to. And I'll stop. Appreciate the opportunity. How does one become a member of the board?
You get appointed by the governor or your statute.
I know a guy. Yeah, just makes sense to me.
General, I think some of the stigma or some of the mystery is maybe a perception that folks have to be geographically proximate to Camp Johnson. Can you speak about the fact that you could literally be anywhere in the state and serve?
Sure. So we have folks from all over the place. We have units, especially the Army Guard, north and south of Vermont, all the way down to Bennington. Everybody needs people. A third of our force comes from out of state. So Region 1, we've got folks that come up here from Rhode Island because they like what we do. They like the career field that they're in with our guard. So there's also potential there to grow outside of Vermont. I'll poach. I'm all in. Air Guard's a little different. They are mostly centrally located. Our cyber information squadron, they are down in Northfield currently. They'll probably end up, once we get the facility built, right in South. But people come from all over the place to serve in our guard. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering and Mechanical Sciences at UVM, so I have one of your board members. I came from RPI when there was a pretty big ROTC program. And then when I think one of the benefits was there was an on-campus community that was with the students who were part of that program. Whereas right now it's that you'll pay and that student is isolated on campus in the midst of all the other things going on campus. So is there an opportunity to discuss, a guard? I don't know what it would be, but something where that we can build the community on campus of students, maybe in Champlain and St. Mike's, because we're all close, that get together, they have a class together, they have drill together on campus, separate from other guard, building that student community, because we find often that students recruit students. So
Yes,
I don't know if that's a possibility or.
it is. We practice the art of the possible. We saw that when I was in the recruiting command billet in Castleton. And we sent a young officer down there, and he was so good at building a network and relationships. He became known as the mayor of Castleton because kids loved having him. And the dean of students actually had him in the same building with the administrative faculty. So that kind of helped remove that stigma. That was great. Yeah, that's what I'm going to get back.
We'd be happy to connect you after to do. I think it's a great idea.
I'll stop talking now. Stay as long as I can. Heather.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Hi, everyone. I want to just level set a little bit about what's going on in the high school of 2023. And actually, the Vermont School Counselors Association just did a great survey. And it might not be a bad idea to think about bringing that forward to the group. So most school counselors are not doing day-to-day what they wish they were, which is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, which is providing guidance, giving some options for students. What they're doing, even worse after COVID, because it was already happening before COVID, is basically triage of mental health, family breakdown, drugs, all of the stuff that is happening in our society at large. So I would want us to leave thinking we can use the same tools that we kind of thought we could use. So I want us to meet and come up with some ways to actually get that messaging out. I just don't want us to rely on our school counselors because it's just not the right time. It's not going to happen.
Well, I certainly, it's tough business right now.
Yeah.
And
It's something we can do some good stuff though.
absolutely. I don't want to paint all counselors in that light. But I got the same type of messaging. I validated it last weekend. I talked to our recruit sustainment program, which are just back from basic training, getting ready to go. There were probably 30 of them asked the same question, and half a dozen raised their hand. What did your guidance counselor? Yeah, I would do that if I were you. You need to go to college. Yeah.
I'm not negating the stigma, but now we need something much more creative because they're not even able to have that conversation.
And not to plug the strategic plan, but one of the things in the strategic plan is some of these joint convenings of education, work-based learning leaders across the state. And I think that's exactly where the conversation can happen, because I think, as you've mentioned, guidance counselors are not doing what they're intended to be doing because of the mental health. So we want to get kind of an all hands on deck approach to who at each of the right schools would be the person to share that message with the students. So I think that would be a great conversation to keep happening.
we don't even call them guidance counselors anymore. So I just need folks to know that. They themselves call themselves school counselors because their role has emerged and has changed so much from being guidance counselors.
But I
Has
think
anyone else heard this or am I like the only person? Thanks, Joyce. So I was trying to level set just a little bit.
Yeah, but I think there's
really
really
important
opportunity
point.
there for sure.
It's a really important point that we need to get. It's a really important issue we need to get right. And that's what I'm bringing us up.
Good. Morning, Jay Ramsey. I'm the Director of Workforce Development at the Department of Labor. How many weeks have I been on the job? 3, 2 months, 5 years.
Permanently, like, full day.
Permanently, a week and a half. So, thank you for your presentation. I get the urgency of the issues that you're pointing out. I also want to make members of the board and whoever is listening from the public aware that there are programs that the department administers in the Workforce Development Division. We have the Jobs for Veterans State Grant. So we have people sort of deployed in our regional offices that work with local veterans and disabled veterans. So our job is to help them. We also can connect people to a program called SkillBridge.
Yes.
And you might be able to talk better about that than I could, but it's at the end of someone's deployment, the military will pay for that member to be in your work site, working a job for 6 months. The military pays those wages. So you have someone with the military work ethic, well-trained, preparing to leave the service in your service for 6 months. We have that program. And then I also, my previous role was the director of the Registered Apprenticeship Program. So we have a lot of opportunity here to connect these military occupations with our Registered Apprenticeship Program, and a lot of opportunity to teach employers how to make that bridge from military experience into a Registered Apprenticeship Program so someone can complete that faster. And they can use their GI benefits and other military benefits to pay for certain expenses in the Registered Apprenticeship Program. So 5 days old, recognize that this is an opportunity for us to further our collaboration. So I just want to put a plug for that at some point in the near future. I'd like to connect with you about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. This is exactly the kind of thing that we should be putting in a digital message to the soldiers and airmen, sailors, Marines, anybody separating from service, so we can get them to come to. Great stuff.
Other than general awareness, so we're all understanding, talking about what the real problem is, where do you see the gap that either the board or us individually can help fill? You know, we obviously, this group doesn't have legislation, doesn't, appropriate money, but where do you see us being most
I
effective?
don't think we'll say that we have this.
Yeah.
I really don't. We can incentivize it. Sure. We have more incentives now in our guard than probably in history. You know, you want to become a cyber specialist, a combat medic, I'm going to give you $20,000. You know, if you're a resident, a doctor, you join our guard, it comes with a $240,000 student payment. I think it comes down to messaging. I think it's helping them to market the guard and lift that veil and get rid of that stigma. Because it's just patently false. But I can't be the only one messaging that. It has to be, I think, a unified approach. It's open, candid, transparent. That's what we've tried to do here in our guard. But I mean, you legislators, and they don't even know who I am. Gosh, I'm nothing special, but I've been here for 4 years. My God, you're a real general. So, but I think mostly it's messaging, and again, it's not for everybody, but at least give us the opportunity to share the information. We can certainly be more effective doing that. Yes, sir.
Gentlemen, myself and a few folks I recognize in the room, we got to tour your facility a month or 2 ago, probably, and it was a wonderful tour. And one of the things that really struck home with me is I think we were in where they were doing. I did a terrible job shooting a pistol, right? We were in that particular area, and one of your folks said, "We build people here. That's what we do, right? We take somebody who's maybe not aligned and got all their act together, if you will, sometimes, and we create better people, right? And we're in the people building business, right? And so I work across the state with a lot of employers. A good number of employers would like better people built sometimes. And I think maybe a part of the state workforce board, some of us that are meeting with employers, maybe that's another audience that we can go to. Not that employers are going to force their employees to join the Guard, but on the other hand, if they know what the opportunities are, purposes, that might be another wonderful connection. We might have more folks here in the workforce than they don't. We only know what we know. Right?
That's a great point, and something, and Tori, I'd love to, if the board is interested, happy to host a tour.
Yeah.
We can bring you out to Ethan on firing range. We can certainly go Army Aviation, visit the fighter wing. Certainly lifting the veil. It'd be great to have Vermont Works for Women there. With all the opportunities. I want you to meet my leaders. They're just incredible people.
And I think making some of these connections between groups of employers or, understanding what resources out there is key. So I think that'll be a lot of the work that we're doing is making sure, it's clear and succinct what you're doing in one place. So it's not piecemeal trying to, cobble everything together. Do I have time for one more question?
Yeah, actually, John, you articulated that well, so I was trying to think about how to ask that question, but to bounce off what he had just said, it's also a good recruitment tool. In terms of when folks are moving to the state or the businesses they're talking about, like, hey, oh, you were in the National Guard in such and such state before. There's a lot of opportunities for you in the Guard up here. So some groups you might want to talk to, like the Vermont Business Roundtable, talk to some, like, I'm sure you talked to the Vermont Chamber or Lake Champlain Chamber, but I think businesses can help in terms of working in synergies together. It could be a good recruitment.
Absolutely. Is anybody here familiar with, I mentioned to Monica earlier, what are they called? The prime. So it's the partnership. No.
Yeah, partnership recruiting initiative.
Yeah, the partner recruiting initiative for military and employers, also known as prime. An acronym. What this is it's a program that we've initiated here. There's an active duty version of it that the Guard has adapted. It's national, it's clumsy, it's slow, ineffective. Good idea. We're doing it locally. And what that does is it partners our Guard with an employer. And our new soldiers come in and they can partner. We have a limit on how many folks they can apply to. I don't know. The national program, a new soldier can partner or apply for a position with 5 employers, 5 participating employers. We don't have a limit. So you partner with us under that prime initiative. We will present your information as an employer to our new soldiers. And again, continue to grow our workforce here. Wait, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
For next break, we have a great presentation from Vermont Women, so I'll turn over to them.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you to all for having us today and letting us talk a little bit more about Vermont Works for Women. We're going to kick it over to Allison to start, but I'm Ronnie Basden, the extremely proud executive director at Vermont Works for Women. We will give you a brief overview of our organization, but our main purpose of being here today is to really talk about our equity and infrastructure framework. We rolled this out in January. This was a collaborative project that we're excited to talk to you all about. It has a complicated detail in it. We hope to answer some questions on it, but it's a living document that we hope extends for many years as we look at infrastructure opportunities for our cities.
Good morning, everyone. It's Allison Lavagna. I'm the Director of Impact at Vermont Works for Women. Most of you are, I think, somewhat familiar with our organization, but just a bit of brief background. We were founded in 1987 as the Northern New England Tradeswomen's Organization. So we have a very long and rich history in promoting trades work for women as really accessible, high-paying career opportunities. We continue that work today. Our mission is to advance economic justice by promoting gender equity and supporting women and youth at every stage of their career journeys. We offer programs for youth, adult women, and gender equity support services to help advance our mission. So everyone here is definitely acutely aware of the critical labor shortage needed to meet our state's infrastructure needs, our climate goals, and other high demand and growing fields in Vermont. I'm sure it's a topic of conversation. Many of you are involved in different circles. We had the opportunity to work on some strategies for how we can address that as a state. Currently, there's a huge opportunity for Vermont with the bipartisan infrastructure law and money coming into the state. And there's a historic focus on equity with these initiatives. And so we have this opportunity to access funding and grow our state, but we really need to think about how we're going to increase the workforce by looking at underrepresented populations. We have been training women for over 35 years, but we realize that that's only one piece of the puzzle. And so being able to support workplaces and educational spaces, state agencies, contractors, others in our state to learn how we can make those spaces inclusive and welcoming is another prime goal of ours, and thus our equity and infrastructure plan. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the process here. Coming off the heels of the bipartisan infrastructure law, in August of 2022, the US DOL's Women's Bureau partnered with the Chicago Women in Trades organization to grant some funding to a number of trades and women's organizations around the country to really dive in and think about how can we include equity, particularly when we think about gender equity, into these career fields in order to meet the demand that we're going to have to build our infrastructure needs. So we received that funding and traveled to Washington, DC in September with several other grantees from around the state. We worked together to come up with strategies and plans. We met with federal agency representatives, and then we came back to Vermont, and in October, we gathered a team of in-state stakeholders. So we met with contractors, childcare advocates, state agency representatives, representation from this board, and the Office of Racial Equity and others to really brainstorm what are our challenges here in Vermont and what do we want to see as we grow these opportunities here. And then we spent the next several months continuing to gather feedback, but also researching some other national models that had some potential here in our state to pull together our framework. So there are copies of it on the tables, but as Ronnie said, it's also a live document that lives on our website. And this is a starting point. So there's research and data and information here. Ronnie's going to go into some detail about the goals and how to use the framework, and that will be available for questions about it.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, Major General Knight, your whole presentation lends pretty beautifully for what we're going to talk about today, because it's all about collaboration. At the end of the day, Vermont right now doesn't have the number of people to meet the labor demand. But guess what? We have a lot of untapped potential that is not being reached that can absolutely help meet our state's labor needs, be engaging, and can grow our economies. But it's not going to be something we just switch on. It's going to take intentional collaboration from multiple different angles, but it's also going to be looking at short-term need and long-term gain. So when we developed this framework, we said, what are our three overarching goals? What do we hope that this framework helps inform, raise awareness, or builds to? And it really fell into three main goals. We want to expand pathways. So that starts with our youth. We want to make sure that it's not on school counselors to tell students what's available, but that there's representation in leadership, that there's representation in those careers, that there's opportunities to engage, build confidence, learn skills, experience what that's like on the job site. I grew up in Vermont, Southern Vermont. I never knew about our Air National Guard. It was never approached me. I absolutely was not told about our career and tech centers. That was slapped on the wall when I got in trouble. So this was not an opportunity for girls specifically. We were not engaged in this work. And so there has to be an intention around the messaging, representation, and how we engage girls. I will tell you that very often we hear, we don't want to talk about weatherization with young girls. They don't want to crawl under a house. Have you met girls today? They are phenomenal and they can do all of it. And some of them are better at crawling into that house than men. So let's absolutely have that conversation. The next thing is to recruit women intentionally into this work. And that also takes a lot of attention from employers, community organizations, state agencies. Offering a woman a job is no longer going to meet the needs. Women don't have transportation, they don't have childcare, and they don't have the skills to be ready for those. On top of, let's just talk about work environments. There are over 70% of women who leave trades industries because of sexual and harassment and discrimination on the work site. That has nothing to do with their skills, that has nothing to do with their pay, that has nothing to do with their benefits. That's to do with the environment. So we can't just say, hey, we trained you, hey, we offered you that job, and hey, we made that pay equal. You have to make it something where that woman can be retained. It has to be family sustaining. So it's coming at it from all angles. And that really dives into the retention. That's where we really talk about, we need to have these uncomfortable conversations. We need to recognize that there are historic barriers that have prevented women, but those still exist. And the pandemic in Vermont especially has only elevated that for women. Women have not surpassed unemployment rates pre-pandemic, but men have. Before the pandemic, women were 81% of Vermont's tipped wage workers. Guess who was the hardest hit when the pandemic hit? Those women. So many women have not gone back to work for a multitude of reasons, but I will tell you, our programs are seeing a massive increase in demand. Women want to be paid better. They want to be upskilled. They want to get into these careers that they hear about in Vermont Digger every day. They want to get into them. They just don't always know how. This is a little call out of the framework that you will see in your packet as well. I would encourage you to go to our website. Each of these little gears is a hyperlink to either a current initiative, a state initiative from the governor's office, something that's happening in Oregon that are great examples of what could be implemented in Vermont. But what we have done here is we took our three main goals and we outlined under stakeholder groups, what could career and tech centers do to meet all three of these goals? What could state contractors do? What could state agencies do? What could the K through 12 system do to meet these goals? And so while there are recommendations, while there are best practices, while there are ideas, the intention of this is to look at it and say, what's actionable? How can I actually move this forward? Within the framework, you'll see there is a very baseline self-assessment. Where do you rank your agency, your department, your job roles? Where do you sit today? And then use that to inform where are the gaps. If you're not retaining women, ask women, hey, you work for me. What makes it a little bit more difficult today? And so all of that is going to help not only recruit, but help retain our workforce long-term. And so that is what a lot of these framework goals do. Meet the labor shortage, the social good of recruiting more women, diversifying our workforce, but it's also the law. So way back in 1965, there was a standard set for state contracts that if they had to meet 6.9% of women within their state contract work. No state has ever met that initiative, 0. And so that is why in the Biden's infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, there are specific requirements for equity initiatives. It is no longer a recommendation and we'd like to see it, it's a requirement now with this. What Vermont Works for Women also have, there's 3 main federal departments that will open up. And when we talk about this funding, we are really talking about the competitive funding process, not the state guarantee process, although we'd love to engage in that work too. But we are talking, when you fill out those grants, your Department of Energy, or Department of Transportation, or Department of Commerce that Vermont will have the opportunity over the next 2 years to apply for. We actually were able to sit down with the Women's Bureau and we have the exact language that we could plug into those grant applications to help you be more competitive. We can help state agencies compete, we can help contractors compete. And Department of Energy and Department of Transportation has already released some of these funding opportunity announcements. And I will tell you, Vermont Works for Women resource who is sitting in the room, we're getting calls because they are required to write this statement. So now is the chance to actually do it well. And this is where we say it's no longer an opportunity to diversify. It would no longer be cool to have more women sitting at the table. It's an obligation. We just frankly will not meet our state labor goals if we don't start putting intention around recruiting more women, recruiting more diversity, tapping into our justice involved individuals. There are opportunities across our state that we can truly get from. For just a quick update on our programs that help work toward this, we have our youth career exploration programs, Rosie's Girls After School, it's welding, it's carpentry, it's building, it's electrical, it's getting exposure, it's getting confidence, it's getting tools in hand. We then go into our Trailblazers Trades Training Program. This is a 7-week training cohort for women. It is 100% free on top of paid. And we partner with local employers for women to, after they complete the modules in construction, electrical, plumbing, heat pump install, and weatherization, they then can go directly to a work site. That employer pays nothing to have that participant engage for those 2 weeks. And then the employer can offer a job. And so that's what we have 5 training cohorts that happen across our state, and those continue to fill up with women who want to get into these careers, but need that extra bit of support. And then the other side of this are gender equity trainings and advocacies. This is where we would love to engage with everyone in this room and on the screen. We want to talk about policies and practices. We want to talk about marketing materials and recruitment. We want to talk about highlighting your female pilot. Absolutely get her out there. Show girls that she's here and what she's doing. It would be awesome. And so we really want to work with you on that. With a lot of different organizations or businesses we work with, we help them start female affinity groups within their organizations. That's something that lives beyond Vermont Works for Women. That will stay within your work site. So these are all ways that you can start better understanding and tackling the barriers. So hopefully long-term, Vermont Works for Women won't have to exist to do this. That's the presentation. It was a lot in 15 minutes, but we would love to open up for any questions. Yes.
Back to your previous slide there, the 44% of tradeswomen report wanting to leave their industry due to discrimination and harassment. That was something I was curious for the general to address too. I mean, women are more than 50% of population, and that's a big part of the workforce that is sitting on the sideline if we're not addressing workplace culture and harassment and just overall male toxic masculinity. And I'm just curious about the kinds of support that and work that you guys do on that front, who you partner with. Are you seeing any shifts in that? Like how's it going out there? Because that's a big number.
It is a big number. I will also say there's a couple different ways I'd like to look at this, and there's 2 really quick stories I'll tell about this, and it lends to how we're addressing it. I will say we're seeing improvements, not as much that's going to make a difference right now. But in 2 partnerships, we have one with the Agency of Transportation. We had Trailblazers graduate that came out, and she was the perfect candidate for AOT's on-the-job training. She went directly into that program. She wanted to do snowplow. So she was super excited, couldn't wait for a kid to name the snowplow, was all about it. Did the on-the-job training, supervisor loved her, all her coworkers loved her. She was doing phenomenal. 4 months into the job, her husband started to get uncomfortable with her hours and how often she was at the work site. And it was all men at the work site. That had nothing to do with the men at that work site. That had everything to do with just the mentality around women working in non-traditional occupations. And so, yes, male toxicity is a problem, but it's also just a general awareness of these issues. And so we are really trying to build that conversation around it's women who access these roles, their skills get them here. It's not anything else. It's not a diversity box to check, but it is that. But I'll also go back to another one. We work with line workers. There are 0 female line workers in the state of Vermont right now, just so you know. But we had a couple at one point, and Vermont Works for Women worked with them. They were also phenomenal. While there were struggles with that work environment, bathrooms, recycling bathrooms, those are all separate issues, did phenomenal. Guess what? We had wives that started to complain because their husbands were in a truck with a woman for long hours all day long. And guess who lost their job? The woman. And so these are issues that, we can talk to you all day long about gender equity. We can train women. We can make them as ready as possible. But how do we fix that? And that's really where it comes into collaboration and community efforts and raising awareness about it. And unfortunately, that number hasn't changed drastically. But on a positive spin, because of labor shortages, because of a high need for employment, we are seeing more industries and businesses willing to sit at the table, have the conversation, and actually make action changes, which is a first big step.
Also, Ronnie, to piggyback on Ellen's point, and that 44%, a recent McKinsey study I read talked about one of the number 1 reasons people leave their jobs is bad supervisor.
Yes.
And that a lot of this harassment is likely tied to poor or incomplete supervision.
Yeah.
Is there a strategy? I didn't notice it in your checklist, but I admit I haven't studied it, but what about that strategy of working with employers around supervisor training?
Yes.
And supervisor period, full stop, is a need within any employer, but to also hone in on these issues of how you deal with sexual harassment, how you deal with an employee who comes and says, my wife doesn't want me riding in that truck with a woman, and So is that a strategy or your?
Yeah, so those are things we would all love to consult with, as well as bring in other resources that help. There's plenty of community organizations that also do this work that we pull in for that. But a lot of what we try to really teach, and it's throughout our programming and is self-advocacy. We want employees to stand up when it's not right, and we want to know how do they go about addressing those. What are the resources they have when something's not right? What happens when there is no accountability? Because at some point, there are certain levels of leadership and management, you're just not going to change their mind. They are stuck in that mentality and they don't understand that gender diversity is actually a good thing. And so at some point, we really want to empower individuals to know, you tell us, is this environment motivating? Is this challenging? Are you getting your needs met? And if not, how can we help you advocate for yourself to address that? And I believe there are resources to do that. A lot of it is why we really encourage spaces to have gender affinity groups. Have places where you can connect and talk about challenges and then make actionable steps that work with you. But we contract, a lot of companies will bring us in and contract for services over a period of time. We just had a great one. It was with a law firm. It was actually very eye-opening. Interestingly, predominantly female lawyers, but the leadership was male. And so there was a lot of misbalance as far as family practices and best practices to make it motivating for all. But by the end of it, I will tell you their new employee handbook is something for everyone to be seen. It's a phenomenal example of listening, engaging. There were some very uncomfortable conversations. There were some very uncomfortable moments, and I love being in those. Those are my favorite part to be in, because let's get to the discomfort, because then we can move on and actually address it.
Right, the statistic from 1965.
What?
It was the statistic from 1965. It wasn't actually that long ago. Right.
0.9%.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just feel like.
So I just wanted to, Ellen, if I could, thank you for the question on what we're doing about sexual harassment. So, the actually, we don't have any tolerance. Vermont National Guard nationally is actually leading the way. I was the only adjutant general with my team to speak with the DoD Interim Review Commission. And it was a very candid conversation with them. Because of that discussion, there were, I think, 82 recommendations. One of the more significant ones was something that we pushed for, bringing in a full-time violence prevention focus. And now we have them hired. Inclusive in that is a legal counsel, which focuses specifically on pursuing those things. All of our policies pertaining to sexual harassment, our HR policies, are on our public website for anybody to see. And we remain, I believe, the only entity in the state of Vermont that actually reports that information. Not just reporting, hey, here are our stats. Here's what we're doing about it. And I think what the important thing is, and I explained this to my 2 committees of jurisdiction this past session, during our annual report, we go back 2 years ago, I think we had 3 or 4 reports, either informal or formal, sexual harassment. Well, not 90. We have an organization of about 3,000 people. I didn't pull up the cabbage truck yesterday. I know what's happening. One of 2 things was going on. Either it was being handled at the lowest level and not reported, or it wasn't being reported at all. I contrast that with this past year, 22, we had 18. That to me is a result of changing policy, building trust in our system and our response, and actually telling folks, here's the outcome. So that's what we're doing.
To your point, I would say when we do gender equity trainings, we require your full teams to be there. Yes, we absolutely want leadership to be articulating and sharing this message. We also want to be having these conversations with who's sitting in the lunchroom with our participant, who's on the job site, who's actually having and riding in a truck and having a conversation at that time. And so it really matters that the entire organization is engaged.
First, thank you very much for the work that your organization does. I really appreciated the guide that you ended up page 16 and 17, where it talks about the checklist and the action plan, because I think workplace readiness is probably one of the most important aspects. But I guess I would ask you to comment on 2 things. One, we've had the great privilege of having a conversation and getting introduced to your organization through a Green Jobs effort that didn't launch, but it was a fantastic conversation. Are you planning to expand into other sort of occupations, industries? And then I always worry about, like, there's so much work that could be done do you have the capacity? Like, and how can we help potentially expand?
We're a nonprofit. We have the capacity.
Capacity, that's never happened.
We never had the capacity, but we're still going to do it. I will say, while Vermont Works for Women has always historically started by 3 tradeswomen, our work will always remain flexible enough to meet the need of the participants in our state. So what are those growing in demand jobs and how can we help meet them? But also, how do we support any woman or youth to accessing any job that motivates them? So we are not tailoring it to that. And yes, I would say we continue to change our programming based on what we hear. So one of our big new initiatives is to really focus on an electrical pre-apprenticeship. There are a lot of women that are dying to get into this focus, but connecting to an apprenticeship model seems a little far reaching. Well, we want to roll out and focus there and support that pathway. And Jay's heard all of my talks on this, but that is one of the ways we do it. We added heat pump because of a demand we heard from employers, but also an interest in women. I want to know how to do that. So yes, I would say there's always interest to grow. When it comes to capacity, it is a little bit of the chicken or the egg. At what point do you add that instructor, that trainer, that staff person, and then hope that demand meets up? One of the ways we're hoping to do it, Vermont Works for Women is poised really well. Always love federal competition grants, but WANTO funding, which is Women in Non-Traditional Occupation. It's a very large substantive grant that would allow us to truly add the capacity needed to not only just grow the number of training cohorts, but grow the number of women in them. I think that's our big thing. Our training is in, Newport, Brattleboro, Berry, Rutland. It's in great locations to reach. And it's just, we need to be able to fund this for more women. And that's really where we find our capacity struggles.
And maybe just one plug for you all, as you apply for competitive grants, one of the most powerful things that can go into those grant applications, a lot of support from employers, that are organizations in this room that can also sign letters to support.
Well, thank you. Some of you already did. Thank you very much. But yes, that is our big thing, because as you've heard throughout of this, we can't do this work alone. You all can't do this work alone, and we stand ready.
I think you made a really great point, sobering as it is, about the 81%. I work in retail myself, like you have to confess to that.
Yeah.
My question, it may or may not be answerable, but where have those folks gone? And how do we bring them back to the table to show that they are career paths in different industries that can lead to bigger and better roles?
Yep. So when the pandemic hit 2020, our employment and career services department, which is one-on-one coaching, absolutely tripled. We were getting so many calls, and the bigger calls we were getting, it was already expensive for me to drive there. I already wasn't making enough to sustain my family. There's no way I can go back. And so it was, what do I do now? And that's really where this upskill, Vermont has so many training, certification opportunities. It's just getting people connected to it is what we recognize. Women didn't know you could go for a VSAC non-degree grant. They didn't know that they have Yale funding. They just didn't know. And so a lot of our work has been, what are you interested in? What are you motivated by? Why don't we try this and see if it works? Our organization, while we run these training and employment programs, we also encourage women to go to any program. Resource has a whole slew of programs outside of what we do. And so part of what we're seeing is women right now are not back in the workforce at the same rate they were. Most of that has to do with childcare and transportation. I'll be very frank. The majority of our women are not back to work because of childcare. And so that is the number one reason. Even if a woman, we just had a solar installer started Uncommon, guess what? She had to leave because her daycare couldn't go to accommodate the hours. Childcare is a massive, massive issue in our state. And so that is where we hear a lot of it. And a lot of it is women want to earn more money. They need to get back to a place. And so trades training, the career opportunities, apprenticeship pathways, there's a lot of ways. But for women who have been historically marginalized or in careers that didn't provide these opportunities, it does take a little more legwork to get there. Thank you. Yes.
I think it also requires a new focus on how can we make careers that traditionally didn't have a lot of flexibility in them more flexible. We hear that from our participants. You know, they really enjoy the hands-on work. They want to be up there on the roof putting on solar panels, but they also maybe need a break now and then and might like to work a couple days in the office. And is there a chance to build jobs like that that are a little more flexible or that have, you know, hours where you can do drop and pick up and that kind of thing. So we're doing a lot of strategizing with employers around those issues too.
And I'll do a really quick plug too for our programs. One of the things we hear a lot, Trailblazers specifically. So Trailblazers has a work experience at the end of it. They do 4 to 5 weeks of in-class work and module work. and certification work, and then they go into a work experience with a local employer. Those local employers, in order to work with us, all we require of them is they have to take one of our 90-minute gender equity trainings, and that is just a baseline of conversations. But what that does is, so a great example, we had a participant come through, she was from a small town in Vermont, but she wanted to be able to work for a small kind of mom and pop electrical output there. Well, it was just this one guy, and he had a guy working for him, and he had no succession plan because basically this young guy was about to graduate and he was going to be taken by some bigger company who could pay more. So he came into Trailblazers. He had no idea what we are or what we did. It was just him. We loved working with them. We got her hired by him. She was well trained. She's now doing the apprenticeship program. He's sponsoring it. But what we also were able to do, he had never had maternity leave policies. He had never had policies on family care. He had never had anything like that. He's never had a woman. And so part of it was we helped him build out an entire employee manual that now this guy not only has recruitment opportunity to bring more in with his benefits, but he has a succession plan in this woman. She wants to stay there. She wants to take over that company. And that's brilliant for Vermont to not lose that.
Thank you. Very interesting. I work with employers across the state, and a lot of times I'm seeing a lot of more supervisory managerial training for retention. Right?
Yeah.
That's the sort of the buzzword probably in the last 18 months or so. And typically every conversation comes to equity, comes to gender equity, just the word equity a lot of times. And they're looking for trainers or training. Do you have a fee for your training? How would I get somebody set up with you folks? Just the logistics.
Yeah, so just reach out to us. Yes, we have a sliding scale fee for our gender equity services or consultations, but we also want to work with, we have a fund that helps support maybe businesses or organizations that are smaller and can't fund that right now. We also access, if we're working with any of our CTE programs, we access Perkins funding to help offset or professional development funds. So yes, we would work with any employer on that. And there's a menu of services. So if you went kind of a one-off workshop, let's just talk about, busting gender bias, we can do that. Or we could do a full scale, over a period of time contract that can lead to bigger goals. Yes. But just
John can fund half of that.
love it.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
you know.
Yeah.
Don't let him off
We'll
the
definitely
hook.
talk to each other. Yeah.
Always I help.
Yes.
Tony,
Yeah, $5 million is coming here, so
What is the Women Can Do conference?
Women Can Do, I love that question. Women Can Do conference is October 7th this year. 5th, sorry, thank you. October 5th this year. It'll be at the Randolph campus. This is, if you've never been, please come. Women Can Do is just one of the most exhilarating, awesome days. We attract about 400 high school female identifying students, and they come out, and as a business, you can participate. So we do what's called an action expo. They're climbing fire ladders. We have welding machines out there. There's a robot dog that kind of freaks me out. They have beta technology comes out with a flight simulator. We have chainsaws. I mean, everything you can imagine. And you've watched these girls, and it is phenomenal. It is so much energy. It is so much excitement. And then what happens thereafter is we try to connect those girls directly to their career in tech centers. Hey, this is what you got to experience here. Look at what that could look like over here. And so that is really the purpose of it. But please come out. I actually know that our youth team has an idea for the guard for, you might not like it, but we have a great idea.
I'm just thinking, I've got some remarkable talent that Irwin.
Yes.
One of our Olympic biathletes.
Yeah.
Finished highest ever in the 15-kilometer individual race in Beijing, higher than any other US biathlete in history. She'll be there. I think it can make that happen.
That would be awesome.
Not only Kelsey Flannery there, who's our newest pilot, but also Lieutenant Colonel Kristen Hubbard, who goes from active duty, who was a former F-16 instructor pilot and a Thunderbird pilot.
Yeah.
And now an F-35 fighter pilot with us.
Oh, yeah.
That's another part of the conference that's so remarkable is the number of female role models that we're able to pull together from industries across Vermont. And, they're out there, and for the girls who attend to be able to see them, that they can see themselves in those spaces as well. And it's just, there's so many incredible people that are able to engage.
Was that the 5th or the 7th?
Thursday, the 5th.
Ignore me, yes, it's okay. There's also a growing demand in our youth for aviation. I will tell you, we get a lot of interest in how can we better engage. You know, Beta Technologies has been phenomenal with that. There's a lot of new virtual reality kind of headset modules that are really incredible. They're extremely expensive, but they are really incredible to also start that process younger. Pat, sorry.
Well, I can't say enough about Women Can Do. I mean, having been on the Randolph campus for multiple years when I was there, the energy in the room is palpable, and these young ladies are excited to learn. I also can't help but think they come with so much energy. They're so enthusiastic. They're up to what, 8th grade?
No, this is high school.
Okay, good. What happens
What
after
happens?
that, you know? And it's like, where'd they all go? I mean, I watch electrical and plumbing apprenticeship. I specifically look for the women, 1 or 2 maybe, you know, it's just not enough. And I kept thinking, where did that connection get lost between what you got exposed to and what you're thinking?
So but this summer, we're launching a program called LIFT. We also love acronyms. It stands for Launching Inclusive Futures in Trades. And our goal is to address that gap we have between our Rosie's Girls Middle School exploration programs and our Trailblazers adult program. We recognize that there is just this one, you know, we offer this one day for girls, but what happens if they had an interest sparked or a passion sparked? And so this program will be for high school, and they'll be getting carpentry, welding, and electrical training. And they're also partnering with the Harbor Freight Foundation, so they'll be enrolled as Explorer Fellows through that program to earn a stipend through their time in the program, with the opportunity to connect to other mentors and professionals to further that fellowship if they want for the rest of the summer. So we're really excited. Enrollment interest was off the charts. We were so excited. In the first 2 weeks, we had a huge waiting list. And so we're starting with just 1 week of programming this summer to test it out. We already know there's interest, and we hope to be able to expand that, especially if we get the federal WANTO funding, we'll be able to expand it. Gotcha.
But trying to address it is big.
Yeah.
Have you, I so know that you partnered for K through 12 stuff.
Mhm.
Do you partner with Girls Who Code and First Robotics?
So we partnered with the First Lego League that has a couple different, don't know what the full title is. We partnered there to try to encourage female enrollment in it. We don't do specific programming because they're co-gender. But we proactively try to recruit more girls into robotics there, yes. Girls Who Code, we don't specifically run coding program now. While there's activities like programming bracelets, things like that, that are basic in Rosie's Girls, we don't run specific coding programs. Any other questions? Sometimes you get 0 questions or a lot, so thank you. Well, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. A huge thank you to Tori and Abby for giving us the platform and also for engaging and being a part of the equity and infrastructure framework. They were a part of our stakeholder convening group. And again, this is a document that will work and grow and ebb, but provides opportunity to just start. So if you have any questions, if there's ways you want to engage, if there's opportunities, please reach out to us. We always love to have conversations and chat and grow equity in Vermont. So thank you. Thank you.
Great conversation. We didn't want to stop it, so we're a little behind schedule, but we covered some time. So let's take about a 10-minute break. So come back together around 35 minutes.
That's
Hi, folks. If everyone could start to return to their seats, we'll begin in just a minute. Right. Okay. Oh, yeah. Sometimes silence is the best way to get silence, right? Look at that. See, silence begets silence. All right, great. So we are going to get things started here with a conversation around the strategic plan. This has been in the works for many, many, many months. It really had to take a pause. In fact, during COVID, obviously, we all had many things to manage. Our core partners, Department of Labor, they read about, they had a few things to do during COVID. So we are now getting our feet underneath us again and ready to get back to taking that action. This is really one of the first steps. A tremendous amount of work has gone into this, both by Tori and Abby, convening countless committee meetings, great participation in those committee meetings. Want to thank everybody who's done that over the last many months, and then assembled all that information, put it into this very comprehensive, easily digestible, high-level strategic plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby. Abby?
Great. So thank you, Adam, for that introduction, and just to remind all of you the strategic plan timeline. As most of you remember, back in May of 2022, we had our in-person board meeting up by the airport in Berlin, where the folks from NGA were with us, and we really rolled out this idea of a strategic plan. When Tori and I both came into these roles, it was really clear from all of you that you all were looking for a sense of direction for the board. And so that's really what this document is supposed to be, so that you all know what Tori and I are doing, and it's a clear sense of the direction that the board is moving in, and also ability for you all to hold us accountable for the work that we are doing or are not doing. So again, we had that meeting back in May of 2022 where we rolled out the idea of a strategic plan. Since then, we've had the framing and review stage, and then the planning and development and refinement. Between then, we've had multiple operating committee meetings. We've had another strategic plan where we voted for the top strategies within the strategic plan that you all had input on. And then we also created those working groups. So within each one of those strategies, we had working groups where you all had the opportunity to sign up, given the section that you were most interested in, and provide feedback. So all of those groups met at least once remotely. Then we had those working groups. We also had the committees. So a fair number of you are involved in some of the regular committee groups that we have that meet quite frequently. And each of those committees have their own portion of the strategic plan as well. So lots of opportunity for feedback. We also had office hours, which were every Friday, where folks have the opportunity to pop in, raise any questions that they might have. So tons of great engagement from you all over the past year, and that feedback has been really helpful in the development of this plan. So as we go through this, if you will just open up the folders that we've provided for you, there's a draft of the strategic plan in there, which you'll see all the sections that Tori's going to go through with us. And then you also have a list of the committee members. So it doesn't outline the working groups and who was involved in what, but you do have a sense of the committee members, who's involved, and those groups are still going to continue to meet regularly after this meeting. And then just to highlight, we also have a committee meet on the 15th from not too long ago to approve of this draft of the strategic plan. There have been minor edits that have been made since there, just typos and things like that, but nothing content-wise has really changed. So again, just to highlight, because not everyone is certainly familiar with all the committees that we have, but we have a number of sector-based committees and then more conceptual committees. Those will continue to meet monthly after we approve of this strategic plan. And then we have the working groups that each met to cover the different strategies and the dates that they met. And then I know you all have been on the receiving end of many emails from me over the past year in regards to the strategic plan. So really seeing it all come together. I know it's a bit confusing, the different pieces that you've been working on. So Tori's going to go over that when I hand the mic over to her. So everyone's aware, you can see it in the plan. You started off with your letter from the governor. Then we have a letter from Adam and Tori. Then we do a level setting section, or what we call the state of play, where we really set the environment in Vermont at this event. And then the main portion that you all have been working on for the last year is this plan portion with the 5 different strategies that we outlined here, where the working groups have really contributed. And then we have the committee portion of the strategic plan, where each committee has its own one-pager, as we like to call it, and it explains the goals that it's going to be working on in the next year to 2 years. So that's the framework of the plan. Those are the different pieces that you all have been working on, and all of it coming together in that document. So now Tori is just going to walk us through the different pieces. Great, thank you, Abby. I just want to give Abby a big shout out. It has been a rock star at holding the many different people together. You all have your individual lives, very busy, 45 individuals' schedules and lives to make sure that they get their eyes on this plan and get input. She also does admin work for the special oversight committee that Adam talked about earlier. So she really has her hand in everything, and also managed the ship when I took a leave of absence to work on a small re-election campaign last year. So Abby, thank you so much for your work. And I also want to thank the folks at Department of Labor. We are in constant communication with them and help kind of set specific vision, help us work with different partners. They've been great partners in this, and Adam as well, who when we first took over this was really excited about the energy brought to the board by Abby and I, and put forward a pretty clear expectation and vision for us that is what this plan ultimately was born out of. So to remind you all, you have had a lot of time to give input on this plan. Many different opportunities, and I think I just want to stress that. So as you're looking through today, if there's something you see that is not perfect, or maybe you'd like to change, I just want to level set and remind everyone of the governor's favorite phrase, let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. We will be proposing at our next meeting in the fall a bylaw change that has a yearly and a 3-yearly review of the strategic plan, so that one, we can adjust dates if necessary, we need to make changes as necessary. It's a living document, so don't feel like it's, there's something you're like, oh, maybe it's not perfect. We're working through all of this. It's not the Constitution. We will not be following it to the letter of the law every single minute of every day. But ultimately, what our goal was here is to get all the many different people moving in the same direction, which, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure I've heard from all of you, has been kind of the biggest hurdle for this board into being a functioning board. So that was really our focus. So when you look through, I'm going to go through the plan. I will not be reading everything word for word. That would take hours and hours and hours. I was joking, Abby, we were printing this yesterday. Our printer literally smelled like it was going to set on fire. So we promise this is just a drafted version. We'll have nicer copies if this gets approved today. But I will be going through it. I will skip over, though, obviously, the governor's letter. And I don't know, you can read this if you'd like, but there's nothing new, I think, in those. So when we're talking about level setting the plan, we want to talk about our challenges, our opportunities, and the ultimate call to action. Our challenges, which I think are best outlined by some of the data on the board behind the food over there. We intentionally put it over there behind the food so people would read it, is our labor force has shrunk over the decades now. We do not have enough people to fill the jobs that we have, and we'd like these industries to grow. We'd like to become, a national player in the aerospace corridor or manufacturing. To do that, we need to have more people into our jobs. And so obviously the pandemic, I think, put a huge spotlight on that. That was a problem that was happening before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, for a variety of reasons that I'm not getting into in this section, we've seen different pools of labor force either disengage, leave the labor force, or then as we've seen students leave our state or not get involved in the labor force in part. So there's a couple of different challenges we face there, but we have a lot of opportunities. There's a ton of great training programs. There's a lot of great resources if you're a worker in Vermont. There's some great resources too if you're a business looking to recruit more workers into Vermont. So there's some opportunities there as well. Vermont itself is a great place to live. It's a great place for your family. It's a great place. You've got a good product to sell to folks that we just need to be able to communicate that well. So our call to action, we are charged with many different things. I think we discussed this at the last meeting, how we have a federal charge, we've got a state charge, we've got stuff in our bylaws. But at the end of the day, the point of this board is to bring all the different people from different workforce spaces, which touches everything, that's why it's so large, into one room to focus and move in one direction. And so that's the purpose of this plan, is to get us on the same page so that we can start moving forward. I think when Abby and I first took over the board, we naively thought we could just charge ahead. And I think getting everyone to take a pause, focus on what are our shared priorities, helps make us as impactful as possible so that you all can hold us accountable to what we're doing, but also so that each person, when you come to a meeting, go to a committee meeting, you actually know why you're there, what role you're playing, and we're not just saying, oh, it's something in the workforce system, which I'm sure many of you, like I, would have a hard time wrapping your head around how to solve that quickly. So these are two things that we do not need to get into. You know, people voted on a long time ago, long before Andy and I got into these rules, but I think the biggest thing is focuses on our mission is to develop and implement a comprehensive, coordinated, and responsive statewide workforce education and training system. Very small, easy feat for us to do. Our approach, as Abby mentioned, was to talk to all of you, talk to many different stakeholders. We wanted to use input from different program providers, from business owners, people on the board, people off the board, legislators, community members, to formulate a framework of our general principles, gain consensus from you all on our top strategies, utilize our working groups, email, one-on-one meetings, stakeholder engagement to identify the actual specific details of the plan, edit, collect, input, repeat, and finalize this as a clear roadmap for board success. So we established 5 priority areas, which kind of touch on all the different things that work within the workforce system or that we need to be working on within the workforce system. So the big one, which is our main federal charge, which establishes the workforce system alignment, workforce supports, workforce education and training, and one we tailored based on feedback from you all from used to be relocation, recruitment, and retention to size and quality of the workforce. I'll pause if there's anyone wants to just look at it here for a second. I'm not going to read this page verbatim, it's also probably pretty small. But I just want to go through some of the themes of the strategies that is kind of how we tease these up. So through WIOA, the theme there is accountability. That was something we heard loud and clear from you all, is that we have this massive amount of federal funding that comes into Vermont. We really don't understand how it's moving us towards our workforce goals. There's some reporting requirements, but it doesn't all make sense in the context of workforce goals. So the big thing there is accountability. And workforce system alignment, this gets to a little bit about what the general was talking about earlier, and that we have lots of different resources, but not everyone knows what they are. Especially those who are program providers in the system might not even know what's potentially available for someone that they're talking to. We have great coordination between state agency partners, but we also have the tentacles of workforce development stand far beyond state government, into nonprofit, into the state colleges, into businesses, et cetera, regional development corporations. And so getting all those folks at least on the same page was a huge barrier. Workforce supports, soliciting and applying for workforce and implementing a language accessibility plan. Seems like these two don't necessarily go together, but the reason that we have solicit and apply workforce board policy input is that this board wanted to recognize that there are things outside of training and recruitment that are related to workforce, like housing, childcare, et cetera. However, it's not our purview to make that policy, but we can support those policies. So that's where that comes from. And then implementing a language accessibility plan. That obviously supports workers as we're trying to recruit new Americans to Vermont or those who do not have English as a first language. Workforce education and training. Convening. That's the main theme there is convening. There's some disjoint between the education and training provider track, education track, and then like college track. They're not necessarily all communicating on a cradle to career basis, and so getting those folks together. And then size and quality has 2 kind of main themes. One, getting new folks into the state, bringing new people into Vermont, And two, engaging folks who were formerly disengaged in the workforce, which is a nice add, feedback from Tom at our last meeting. So we've got our three, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, develop, implement, and modify the WIOA state plan. Just want to remind everyone that's actually coming up this summer. Thankfully, you won't have to do what you did for this plan for that, but there will be some new steps taken after that's been developed. Selecting a one-stop operator and monitoring system improvement, and then creating and applying state performance accountability measures for each of these areas within WIOA. Looking at developing and implementing and modifying the WIOA state plan, the purpose of this is one, we have to do this as a federal obligation. Two, turning this massive document that we have to do into something useful for us makes sense. We don't want to just do this plan and then have it sit on itself for a year and then have us all groan the next time we have to do it. It actually should inform some of the work that we're doing. If the data should be useful to some of the work that we're doing. So some of the actions that we will be doing is reviewing what our performance goals are in the plan versus where we actually performed, providing feedback and suggest corrective measures if we're underperforming in some areas or figure out why we're underperforming in certain areas, and then report and assess progress on WIOA program contribution to our overall state goals. Are we engaging more workers in the workforce? Are we upskilling more people? Where is it actually contributing to the workforce? Selecting a one-stop operator. This is an elusive one, but one that we're all very hopefully excited to do this year. Again, this fulfills another federal requirement. We have to have a one-stop operator. But where the board comes in here is they actually report to the workforce board on their performance. And so looking at how well they're coordinating the various partners, that would be a big piece for the workforce board. The selection will happen likely this summer. And then also monitoring system performance and ultimately deciding whether or not we contract again, find a new vendor, et cetera. That's where the board comes in and giving that input. And that's why the data in one and the next one I talk about are so important, because I think it's very hard for people to make decisions if you don't know how well they're actually doing and compared to what, right? So that leads us to 1.3, which is.
For a quick question, to go back to 1.2 again, so for that one-stop operator, who is their day-to-day contacts with managing that contract?
So that would be staff, like us on staff.
So it's the staff of the board.
Yeah.
So it's a contract with the board, not the department?
Yeah, I was thinking of one of the departments.
Yeah.
So it depends. It's tricky with how WIOA is funded, but it essentially the board selects the one-stop operator, so that's who they're reportable to. If they're funded generally through WIOA funds. Sorry if I'm not a lawyer, so if I'm not doing this correctly, but ultimately it will be state like WIOA funds funding them, but their reporting entity is to the board.
Every state's a little different, based on what we've seen, but the biggest thing in the past was that the Department of Labor had been the one-stop operator, but we were also an interested party. So when we were trying to negotiate memorandums of understanding and funding agreements, it just became really difficult to be the neutral convener and negotiator, but also have the vested interest in how the agreements develop. So other states have used higher education organizations who operate sites and locations for one-stops. It just so happens that the only official certified one-stop in Vermont is also owned by the Department of Labor, and in other states, that's not always the case.
Okay, so the board actually has that statutory authority.
Yeah.
For this.
So the board has the statutory authority to select the one-stop operator. Well, and I shouldn't say statutory, under WIOA has the authority to select the one-stop operator. Now that operator, again, could have been, if we had decided to go that route, the Department of Labor. And in the past, when that dynamic was there, we were working with the board to make sure we were meeting the one-stop operator requirements.
Right.
So under the new method, it would be a third-party neutral entity. And again, they would still be working with the staff of the board to make sure they were meeting requirements.
Yeah, and for full transparency, we already put out an RFP for that. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the next steps, but to the commissioner's point, the purpose in taking that out of the Department of Labor was not, was ultimately because if we're gonna be the neutral convener, bringing all these partners together, it doesn't make sense to have one of the partners be doing that. So I think that's kind of, we want to take it outside a little bit. And also it does give some capacity to the folks that are doing some of this work within Department of Labor to actually focus slowly on their programmatic work, because the way that WEO funding is, it's not necessarily like, here you go, here's your one-stop money. It's kind of baked into Title I. So it's not necessarily super clear. So that's why we've given this kind of as a board oversight function. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes.
So fairly straightforward here. We would have this live mostly in the policy committee, but also obviously the full board, that these things would be coming to the full board. We would be identifying the most relevant performance accountability metrics. Many program partners are required to give a suite of performance accountability metrics. Not all of those are necessarily super important to us. And so the policy committee would be working to one, define those, collect them quarterly, and report them out to the board. Next steps in this area. The operating committee, you'll be hearing from me very shortly about reviewing bids for the one-stop operator, because ultimately we will have to vote to approve that. And the policy committee will begin meeting to discuss performance accountability measures.
Question, is the performance accountability measures that we're gonna be reviewing, is that just for WEO programs, or hope to expand that? I mean, there are workforce development programs that exist using state dollars that are not funded with federal.
For all. Just because the idea is not to make the reporting piece of this burdensome on the entities that are doing it, but just using things that are already reporting. So if we're gonna ask that of new programs, it needs to be before, we're giving them money, or it's something that's not burdensome. Chris?
And only, again, it's not meant to put a wrench in it, it's just more for clarification, so I don't confuse myself. So for this strategy, when I was reading through it, under the lens in terms of what the board, what's for the board strategy versus overall workforce development, am I correct in looking at it that way?
Yeah.
So in development of KPIs, for example, we can influence in terms of our recommendation.
Correct.
Is that the way to look at this?
Yes. So, yeah, and we're very clear in the beginning that we were not creating a strategic plan for the workforce system. If we were to do that, we would say, we need to do X, Y, and Z 5 things in the next year to solve this. So what we want to do is give the board a productive voice in that conversation. So collecting this information, putting this together, saying, look, here are our best top 5 WEO performing programs, or here are our top 5 state defining programs. They're really, this program is taking 800 new people into Vermont every single year. This is a great program. Being able to kind of level set in that way and having it in one place, I think is really helpful, both for the governor's office, but also for the legislature. I think if any of you dealt with the legislature this session, it's the way that their committees are structured. It's not like there's a workforce development committee. And so it's often really hard in a vacuum in a committee to identify, like, how does this fit into, the number of people we're working. So that's kind of where the board comes in, is collecting and getting us information in a productive way. Workforce system alignment, our 3 focus areas here: warm handoff system, fostering and maintaining regional business partnerships, and expanding workforce services to marginalized groups. We recognize the warm handoff system is like step 1 in creating an aligned workforce, but as you all were very clear with us, that Abby and I need to make sure we don't bite off more than we can chew. And so we pared this down a lot. But at the 1-year mark, if Abby and I have already fixed this problem, then we can go ahead and add more. But the purpose here is, once we've selected a one-stop operator, it allows us to convene the one-stop partners more easily and have some more candid information about the overall system management. What we're really looking for here is some of that information sharing, so that there's a no wrong door policy. We have to always use hireability as like the shining stars that if you call them, they will know exactly where to send that person if that's not the right place. We want that everywhere. But we also want to be able to track our customer service and whether or not a referral is turning into a job placement or a career development opportunity, not just how many people they talk to. So that's really the focus of this area. The purpose is to improve our actual service delivery to Vermonters with workforce services. Fostering and maintaining regional business partnerships. Some of you may know, Abby and I have traveled 14 counties over and over again over the last year just to talk with business owners in each county to hear their needs, bring this a more regional approach to workforce. We want to do that in a more strategic way. The purpose is because ACCD, VDOL, regional development corporations, other entities are already doing this. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, keep going to same businesses, asking them for help. So organizing some joint convenings, getting people on the same page about when those meetings are happening, and then also sharing back with you feedback that we get from businesses, so that if we are in the policy development stage of something or policy recommendation stage, we can say, hey, someone from Brattleboro said this about their business. It sparked this to me, can we look deeper into this? So we're actually bringing input from businesses in different regions and their needs back to the board. Expanding workforce services to marketplace groups.
So, sorry, Victoria, I just go back on the regional business partnerships, and that all sounds perfect and great. But it also strikes me too that some of the best work is really happening on a regional basis, to your point.
Yeah.
You don't want to interrupt anything that's happening. Is there going to be a lens that you look at through this work to see how we can strengthen those regional efforts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is making sure that when we're doing regional business, we're getting RDCs involved and RPCs involved, as well as local chambers in certain areas. Every county has kind of their entity that's doing what, they know who it is by name, that's doing something great in terms of building workforce, connecting people, et cetera, working with those entities around what's working for that community. And not us getting in the way and being like, why don't you do it like Burlington's doing, or why don't you do it like Washington County's doing it, but understanding what those best practices are, and then also hearing what their barriers are that they can't cross. Because that is where we can help, is understanding kind of where those barriers are, and then maybe the barriers for Washington County and Wyndham County are the same, we just didn't know before.
But I also think there's not necessarily uniform delivery of the same services statewide. So how do you get, those places that are really getting it done to, mentor, support those that are either just getting started or struggling? Money always comes up.
Right.
And I don't want to be one of those old farts who says, oh, back in the good old days, we had WIBs. But, when we back in the good old days, there was some really good regional activity happening. And I feel like the RDC's chambers are picking up a lot of that work, which is great. We don't need another entity necessarily, but the funding to enable those organizations to do it and do it well is what is a challenge. I mean, I'm going to shout out for Alex and Adam. And I had an opportunity to be at the Southern Vermont Economic Summit on Tuesday, and it's phenomenal to hear the work that is going on in Wyndham County, and feeling like, boy, if that was happening everywhere, we've had this problem licked.
Yeah.
And so how do you, but Adam and BDCC are completely different financially fed organization than so many other of the RDCs. So how do you get that kind of ubiquitous ability? And I personally feel the board's responsibility is to encourage these regional approaches and provide the data and provide the direction, but not try to be the one to do it all. I think that decentralized delivery makes a ton more sense because they already had those relationships. So I think if we can look at this from how do we get more capacity and capability where it doesn't exist now, in addition to supporting the good work that's already happening.
And two funding plugs I will mention from this last session is an increase to the RDCs.
Right.
An increase, which I think is well deserved. And money to tourism and marketing, an increase in tourism and marketing to empower some of the RDCs that are already doing relocation work, like I hate use this word, so we're using concierge service relocation work really, really well. Right now they're doing that without any funding. They're just doing it because it's good for their communities. So I think that as well will also enable us, because they'll have to say this is how many people I relocated. We'll be able to see who's really high performing and help some of the other RDCs, other areas, entities that are doing this perform well and kind of get up there as well. I know you had your hand up, if there was something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I think this regional work is just so critical. We saw with the regional workforce summits. And what this does is I think sets us up for some of the SOCWED, hopefully recommendations that identify this is a key piece and with like, if they're, not necessarily whips, but recognizing that there is an opportunity for local, regional groups to convene, push up, pull down information from the state. That's what's going to make this work. So this is where it's a perfect example of where the strategic plan for the board and the SOCWED will come together.
And the solutions are not, I mean, the regions are not homogeneous, so the solutions may not be, but the practices, that best practice sharing is really critical, I think, so.
Certainly. Yeah, I can agree more.
Tori.
So the devil will be in the details there in the work, but I think people are really interested in empowering some of our regions to do this. So I just want to point out that this is different than a section in our labor force participation section, where the focus here is really just on ensuring more direct access to marginalized populations to our workforce services, workforce events, not just hoping they come to us, so we come to them, hosting joint meetings with the Office of Racial. They are actually already starting to plan these radar meetings, helping, expand, just introducing board members, introducing appointing authorities, HR managers to different communities across the state and different affinity organizations. And so we included this in our plan just because it allows us to put a little bit more of a focus on doing either a labor on location event, doing a job fair in certain areas that might be, new Americans might more be living, and kind of expand our direct outreach to marginalized communities and getting them into some of our workforce services to support them. So the next steps, you will be receiving probably as early as next week our county visit schedule. We actually have 2 scheduled next week in, I believe, Rutland and Orange County. And each of those will be providing, we'll probably not do it per each county, but probably on a quarterly basis, just giving you an update of who we talked to, what we talked about, how these things went. And then following the selection of the one-stop operator by midsummer, we will start beginning some convenings of the partners to talk about some of these things with the warm handout system. Workforce supports. So solicit and apply workforce board policy input, implement the language accessibility plan for workforce related materials. So we've already started on milestone 1 of this, which is providing you all with bi-weekly legislative updates and giving you an opportunity to give us your feedback on how the legislative session is going, coming to our office hours. We had some great conversations with you all about either areas we may have thought we missed this year, or we need to focus on next year, or clarifying questions about different policies that were proposed, either from the legislature or for the governor. Starting in this summer, by August, we will start to have our policy committee convene, talk about needs assessment, gaps in programming, strategic priorities. But ultimately, the whole goal of this is that by the fiscal year 2026, we want to do this in a systematic way, a gradation of steps. Have the board come to the governor during the policy process with, these are our top 10 recommended strategies for workforce, our top priorities for workforce development this legislative session. So that was one that was because you all had made that clear to us that you wanted a piece in that process. And I think it also fits nicely within some of the other work that we're doing. If we're hearing from all these different entities, it gives us a chance to have our voice heard in that policy making process. 3.2, this is based on a governor's budget line item, which was to fund translation of, I believe, to the top 10 languages for all state documents to the Office of Racial Equity. What we would do is a twofold process in the board's action in this. One can be compiling employer and employee toolkits that are easily navigable, simple, and understandable with a compilation of resources. That's step 1. Step 2 is getting that to Office of Racial Equity and their vendor so that they can have those translated. They have an ongoing base allocation to keep translating materials every year as new things happen. So as we change things, we just keep getting it to them. We work with them. We literally share a lot with them. So we've been talking with them about this quite often, but because of because of whenever the session ends, they got a contract with a vendor. We can't give you a specific timeline of when those will all be translated by, but we can start working together and getting our resources together that we believe are the most valuable workforce tools.
All right.
Yeah.
Are we doing anything, or maybe the administration will work with federal funding for some of the essential language, English language learning, in regard to supporting this? Are you aware of anything?
I'm not certain, but that might not be a question for me.
So, one of the things that we've seen is it's just, there's not enough money in the state, because there's not enough money coming in with the mechanism or our increased level of need in the state.
Right.
And, we haven't even learned if this is a 3-year, slow move that's based on maybe it's 2 years of your funding or what, but we've seen exponential growth in the last years and not. And how do we provide that?
Yeah.
It's going to be a key thing for us as this board and as a state.
Any other thoughts or questions for motion next steps? So starting in August, probably prior to that, policy committee will begin meeting regularly to discuss priorities. And sector-based committees will begin meeting as soon as next month to start talking about their priorities as well. And this summer, staff will be compiling resources for the employee and employer toolkits, start workshopping those with you all. I know whatever we compile will be missing things. So we will be bringing that to you all to be like, hey, did you think about this person in this place and this resource, and making sure that we can do it in a way that it's not as large as our strategic plan, but it's exhaustive enough that if someone, I like to think of it as like a choose your own adventure, like can figure out exactly how to best do themselves. Ellen?
I just really, this is great, and I just really want to encourage the policy committee and you guys as staff. Because there's so many entities out there providing services, and they're all, if they are all reporting quarterly, there's just a sea of data. And it's a lot, the question is it the right data? And then when we get sort of the right data, how do we make sense of that? And I think that is one of the things that I think has been missing in the system is whose job it is to actually look at the data and then ask the so what question. Is this okay, we got all this information, now so what? What is this actually telling us? How do we make sense of it so that the board can wrestle with some of these, what might that suggest in terms of a pivot or a slight direction change, or continue to amplify that because it really is showing results? You touched on a little bit, but I'm just wondering how you're thinking about, is that the policy committee's role to do the sense making? Is that staff role, is it combo? How does that happen?
I think it's a combination. I think one of the biggest things that Abby and I have stressed in the development of this plan and our work with the board is that we would like our committees to be formal and that they have a clear purpose and clear structure, but not so formal that we can't bring in experts or area experts in when we're talking about different things. But I believe that, it's not just simple as we look, like I can look at the data and be like, oh yeah, that's what that means. I think we need to have the policy committee folks working on that and then say who wasn't in the room that needed to be to make sense of some of this data. And focus on either it's a program provider who's really been on the ground for 50 years doing this and knows exactly why something's not happening, or if it's something else, it's a business related thing, getting the chamber or someone, like getting the right people to have those conversations. But I believe it's role of policy committee, operating committee, and the board. But with this specific piece, I think that work will happen.
And when you guys get that data, when DOL gets data, are you getting it in trend format or just quarter by quarter by quarter?
It's the big question of when we get data, like which data?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about the performance contract with all the different nonprofit things that are.
So like WIOA performance, so some of that doesn't even go to DOL, like some of that just goes directly to their federal program, so it's all right now. It's all in different places. It's not in one place. Hence the purpose of the one stop in some respects is to make sure that we all have that data. And we ask for how we want it. Is it in a trend? Is it, do we want to see how this data looks for program participants aged 15 to 60, I don't, whatever.
Most of that data too is designed for the feds,
For
right?
reporting.
Like, yeah, it's how they determine what, funding amounts and participation amounts. It's not like, there's something like 400 data points we
Yeah,
collect at any
it's-
given time, but
yeah.
I don't, most of those aren't useful.
Hence,
We could probably throw away 2/3 of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
hence having the policy committee be tasked with determining which ones are important. And I think to your point, deciding what we're missing. And that's also an area where I think the SOCWED will come in, is that they are also doing this analysis kind of in congruent with our work. And they will also be able to say to us at the end, this is the data, these are the data sources you really don't even have access to, or you don't have. And so asking those questions as well, like a recommendation for fiscal year 2026 could be as simple as, we would like to start collecting data on X, Y, and Z thing. Or do, X, Y, and Z longitudinal study, whatever it is, like that could be something, like, we have to figure out, I think, first, what do we have? What makes sense? What's actually important for us to track? Because like you said, you have to report, ad nauseam, different things, so they're not necessarily all useful to us.
Piggyback off that, we're not collecting data on every program that's out there that has a training, system or workforce development program. We've actually seen the opposite with the federal program requirements. They want us to collect a lot more data, and we've actually seen a lot of training providers or entities saying, yeah, we're reporting that, but we don't want to collect that, so we're not even going to be on your training provider list because we don't want the burden of having to give you that information. So there's actually, I think, a pretty big gap here of really collecting a small bit of information, maybe a lot of data, but it's only a small bit of information on the few providers that we're working with for our program performance reporting. And that leads to my point earlier of, is there actually a greater push to force entities to give us participant information so we can then report on program outcomes, whether we're funding them or not? And I'm only saying us because we have the wage data, the UI system. So that's what I'm interested in. Is there going to be a direction of push of saying, we want to be informed of what all these different workforce development or education programs are doing and what are the outcomes? You have to figure out what's the data that you want, what's most valuable, and then you have to force those entities to give it to us in a structure that's going to allow us to then report on it.
So also to point out the training and credentialing piece of this plan and the Career Pathways Committee, one of the things that the committee can discuss, and it was in one of their, is thinking about what are our credentials of value, what's actually on our eligible training provider list. We actually sent out a letter whenever this change was made by the feds last year, and eligible training providers basically like, you do have to report all this data and keep it first time. I'm not going to do this. I don't want to be on your list. But we understand there are very valuable credentials that you're not technically eligible training providers. So obviously they wouldn't get that distinction if they weren't doing that, but understanding that there are different tracks and knowing what those programs are can happen through the training credentialing committee, which I think will be valuable for everyone.
Other important component is that we have limitations on our current data system. So we might want to collect lots of data and be able to report on lots of data, but we are limited in its functionality. So we have a contract. We're in the process of building a replacement that will help us provide a more robust data set.
Yeah, I think the challenge, of course, is always, there's so many different possible interesting little factoids, right, that we say is data. But it's really, really difficult process to go through to figure out what is the really data that tells us what we really want to know.
Right.
So that we can then make continuous improvements.
Right.
And that process of sifting, figuring out, like triangulating certain data, this is never collected in the way that you really wish it was. Like, that's really hard. And this report, as long as I've been on it, has never tackled that. To really figure out what do we really need, get rid of all the extra noise and the stuff where people are like, screw it, I'm not gonna be because I don't wanna collect every, as somebody on the other end of it, it's absolutely, I understand that. So what's the right data to be collecting?
Well, and that starts with what are the questions?
Exactly.
And is that what the policy committee is gonna be, is what are the questions we want answered?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other, I think Jay brings up a good point in terms of capacity, but does it have to be Vidal who does the analysis? What about a Center for Rural Studies? What about somebody, else that could take all this with these questions and here are the data and then, I mean, and getting that trend data, I think is critical too. So, I mean, great.
Yeah, so Jake, question in the, how are you building that data resource? How flexible will it be?
Well, right now, the system that we use is part of a consortium. So anytime we want to make a change, it requires a lot of effort. And this solution that we have a contract for will be our data solution. We have a vendor, we have an internal project manager. So whenever we want to make a change, it's just, here's how we're going to pay for it. Vendor, please build this. And so we'll shorten that process, but it will be way more flexible than our current system allows.
So it would allow people to go in and play with the data, maybe not in a graph that's already been developed, but they could download data and plot it into a way.
That's where we're headed.
We don't have to have all the other states though in a consortium make that okay, which I think will be the biggest hurdle and change. I don't know, is there a hand or can?
So I think, this is bringing up a really important point, which is that there's some data that we need to figure out how to help environment pertinent. So, we have the commercial drivers, that's being told they have to collect ongoing data for 5 years after they've graduated a student to report back. It means they're not going to do it. They can't do it. So how do we help create a solution for that if it remains federal level requirement? And I think that's where this board can really be helpful and say, if this is required, let's figure out how to make this work.
But also hence why we didn't give this as a action of the full board to do together, because I think it would be impossible to get, I think we have 46 members on the board to all make a decision about what the most important thing is. I will say, generally speaking, here's what I'm looking for if we're looking for useful data. How many people you're serving, how many workers is it contributing to our workforce? How many people is it necessarily training or upskilling? If they're getting trained or upskilled, are they going to a job in Vermont? Those are the guiding principles that I see as dictating whether or not something's impactful towards our workforce goals. Because at the end of the day, it is a numbers game in terms of people in. However, obviously, if we're evaluating different types of things, different types of policies, that's a different question. But I think that's something that a policy committee could wrestle with and have input in as well. But I promise you, it's not going to be something where it's like a closed door meeting and you all don't know what's happening. And we will make sure that we're not just going to say, here you go, or here's our list of what we believe is important. And there'll be some conversation between what's happening, but a lot of that work product will happen on the policy committee. Because most of the actors who are collecting a lot of that data or have to collect a lot of that data are sitting on that body.
Yeah, real quick, I'm just gonna say, and I'm not speaking out of turn here, Commissioner, but like, it doesn't have to be the Department of Labor that is actually doing the data mining, if you will, and the projections that you're talking about. Like, if you're wanting to look at trends, I think the biggest thing we have to figure out as a system, and if it's through the policy committee with this strategy, that's fine, figuring out what's the information that's needed to answer the questions you want, and then forcing the entities that are getting funding to collect and provide that. So what I mean by that is, if you want wage information from the Department of Labor, you don't want to have to manually track people for 5 years to figure out whether they're still working and what's their wage, et cetera. We have to have Social Security number in stock. And so if you want to force entities to collect that and then provide it to us, we can build the APIs in place to just spit out that information. And then that can go to a third party entity that is then doing the type of data mining you want and compiling it in a user-friendly, presentable format. The question then just becomes who's paying for it.
Right.
Because our federal dollars aren't necessarily going to pay for it. So I think those are your biggest issues we got to figure out how to resolve, which is what's the information you want? How are you going to require entities to then collect it and provide it back to us if wage information is the most important thing? I'm not saying that it is, but I'd be interested in what's the, do they have a job? And another thing I think is key is it in a job in which you've trained them for? If we're spending so much money to train somebody in a specific occupation and then they turn around and 6 months later they're working something else, is that really valuable? I don't know. Very answer that question, but so that's all the things that I would be
I would also think this conversation illustrates very clearly why we wanted a strategic plan.
Right.
Because we could go pick any single issue on this today. We could go in circles for the whole long weekend, if you'd like, to talk about where we need to look, how we need to figure these out. What we've done, to the best of our ability, if it's not perfect, is given specific groups, committees, entities, or the full board the guidance to ask these questions, figure out what information we need, and then start working on how to solve that problem. When they come to the roadblock, that's like, oh, we can't pay for it, that's when that comes to the full board about a potential recommendation. We weigh, everyone's gonna have roadblocks, we weigh what's the most important in terms of our priorities after that. So I think that is a great little exercise on kind of why we need this work, but I do think it raises a lot of really great points, especially about data. And I will give UVM a shout out. We work with UVM, their data folks all the time. And they're very helpful at giving us kind of like big picture, how many manufacturing jobs we have, or et cetera. So I do want to give you all a shout out because it is nice not having it be our consortium data.
Excellent.
Yeah.
If you had the social security numbers, is there this ancillary data we've been talking about that could get connected in? Like, is there a statewide system where we would know where they live and where their job is, and therefore how far they're commuting, and be able to correlate how far they're commuting with how long they stay in the job? I mean, I'm making things up, but how broad a set of information can you get with just that social security?
I think in theory, I think you can get there. I mean, one thing we're not going to know, for example, like we could tell you who their employer is, we could tell you where the employer is registered. We're not going to tell you whether the person works at that location. We're not. But, you know, can you take the information and overlay it with information that other entities have? Sure. And then again, just because that's not something the Department of Labor has to do. You know, we're restricted in a little bit in some of the information that we can provide, but if it's for a public service and for the board's, use, for example, I mean, I think that's something we can do.
That's why I was asking that sort of dashboard concept as opposed to setting data concept. If you're doing it now, then there's this opportunity to create this.
I think I'm sure everybody's aware, we're working on developing a new unemployment insurance system. And part of that is not just the issuance of benefits. We are the entity that collects all the wage record information for the state of Vermont. So part of that will be us examining what is the information that we're currently collecting from the employer population. And we will need to have conversations with employer groups probably over the summer into the fall, potentially with the board, if that makes the most sense, about what is the level of information that we would like to collect on a quarterly basis from employers. For example, right now it is extremely minimal. What's the wages? We ask if it's hourly or salary. We don't really have a lot of confidence in that information. And we really don't collect any gender related information. And so I think there's a lot that we see as potentially collecting additional information that could be useful, but then the question is, we need to make sure we're going back to the employer community and having that conversation, because it's a burden on them. They're having to report all of their information and collect it, and so, but.
Am I sorry? No, you're good.
I think, just as an employer, all employers already track most of the information you probably want. So my hunch is that once the reports got prepared, it would be no additional burden to send them off. And most of us use payroll services anyway, so it's probably a smaller number of payroll services who would have to create additional things. So I think that'd be relatively easy. My point I wanted to make was that there's really sort of three phases of information that I think we should be interested in. One is before someone even comes into a program, or at the point of entry into a program, what experiences, lifestyle, corrections involvement, educational history, what has someone had? Because that's going to determine how hard of what's the investment look like, how much work you have to do to get someone skilled. And then there's the investments that a workforce provider or educational institutions providing. And that's pretty easy for that educational workforce training provider to give. Did they get a credential? Did they graduate? Things like that. How long were they in the program? But then there's the part that happens after that, once they finish, that 5 years later, are they working, you know, do they move out of state? What happens? And I think, you know, that's very hard for the individual provider to keep track of. And so I do think that if we really want a robust information system that would guide policy decisions, it has to be done at the state level. And I think it needs to be done by the state, not by a private contractor, because of the confidentiality issues that, you know, really we're talking about a lot of confidential information at the Social Security level. And so I think it has to be the state if we're going to do it, because we would trust the state to do it. I think we can trust the state. At least I would. I mean, I think that has to be the conversation. Are we comfortable with that level of information sharing? Because that's the only way we're going to get good data. And
I think to Cameron's, but we can also de-identify the data too, right? So when we ship it out, it doesn't have to have a social.
that's exactly right. Yeah, but you have to have it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I mean,
begin somewhere.
and we have to feed stuff into your system. And then you have to be the owners of it and give it back to us in an aggregate way. And I do think we want that. But there is a comfort level that we all have to, you know, the public needs to get to and have a little bit of a dialogue around, are we comfortable with that? And then there's all these hurdles you have to face with communication. When someone goes out of state and starts working in a different state, are we going to show that as a failure because we don't see them just working, but they're actually working out of state? So it has to be, is it a tie-in to some broader systems?
I think one of the things I really like about this plan is it's broad enough and flexible enough to allow for these conversations to happen as we're sort of building the plane.
Yes.
So I think this is a fantastic conversation, probably not going to solve today, but one of the things that I also like about this plan and the conversation we've been having today is it encourages participation from both employers and participants in the training programs. And that's one thing I would caution us as you think about what you need from an employer. Especially small to medium-sized businesses don't have the level of sophistication to necessarily provide it. So it's not that they don't want to participate. It's just they're already doing everything they can to maintain the businesses as they are today. So if we can think about how we may enable organizations, and the example was already used in today's meeting, so I'll use it again. You know, I've had fantastic experiences with lots of programs. Hireability, workforce connections, or creative workforce solutions where I work. They were a savior for me as it related to people with barriers, meaning as an employer, as a director of workforce development. Part of the reason why I didn't participate is I didn't understand and didn't think I had the capacity to do it or participate. And all of that was alleviated by that organization once I was understood. So I think if we think about programs and meeting employers where they're at, as was shared, I think they'll share their information. They have to understand it. And then probably provided some support. The organizations don't have, like I said, a level of sophistication to do it independently.
Yeah. I just want to, well said, I think too, as I mentioned, we're getting into kind of the work of the plan.
You know, these are the right things because we're digging down.
Right, which is good, So I just want to remind you all that our work is, this plan is not the work. The work happens after the plan. So just to be clear, go ahead, John.
I just want to state real quick, is my program, the Vermont Training Program, is a workforce grant program that employers apply for. And for the past 8 years, we have had a partnership with Department of Labor to collect social security numbers that we can report and sort of aggregate wages on. So the mechanisms there, and sometimes employers with 5 employees are able to do it. So I don't think that particular piece would be over.
Thank you all. That was great discussion. So along similar lines, talking about workforce education and training, talking about meeting those two, meeting someone through training to that actual commitment. I mentioned this earlier, 4.2 earlier, about kind of those education training. I'll start with career pathways. So this lives directly in the Career Pathways Committee. This is one of 2 committees, one of 3 committees that are statutorily required to be on our board. So it's a committee from the Vermont Legislature, Training and Credentialing Committee, which we'll talk about in this as well, and then the Youth Committee, which is a federal requirement. We're not going to talk about necessarily that today, although it's in the plan. So there's some career pathway mapping work that happens at the agency of education level. There's some that happens through the Department of Labor. It's prior to the pandemic, there's a lot of work that happened. This committee is tasked with identifying and making those paths very clear for all of our Vermonters, what those opportunities are. And so that really is the work of the Career Pathways Committee. So first and foremost, the committee was reviewing work that had already been done, developing a new formal process for approval of a determined career pathway and market and promote career pathways throughout the state of Vermont. Some of this work will be really useful from the actual committees, sector-based committees. If you look into those one pages, which I don't go through in this presentation, they talk about what their role in that kind of determining a pipeline would be for manufacturing. I think is a great example, working with talent pipeline management, et cetera, other partners. Each of those committees kind of talk about their way of determining their own pipeline. And so that would kind of feed into the work of the Career Pathways Committee. Hosting education and training provider roundtables, we talked about this. What was said to us from work-based learning providers, counselors, educators, training providers is we're not all on the same page. So a good step and a good way for us to fill our role as a convener, bring those people together. Hearing things from National Guard today or from Vermont Works for Women, those people who are actually speaking to the students and actually doing the work-based learning or doing those different programs, or they're actually working with the student or their principal, having the right person at the school have that information is crucial. And so step one is the board can act as this convener, bring these folks together, have them start to work on obviously some of their, either communication breakdown or things that they need to work on. We are not in the business of overseeing the education system, so I want to be clear that that's not our role, but we can bring them together so they can have those conversations. And then I talked about this briefly before, but defining eligibility and approval of credentials of value. So we want consistency in this process. We want to determine eligible providers, put them on our eligible training provider list so they're able to receive WEO funding, but also determine other valuable credentials that someone can use so that if a business is saying, I would like to hire someone with this suite of skills, a competency-based skill, not a credential-based skill, that we can actually say, okay, they have this credential that's actually valid. Go ahead.
Sorry, going back to career pathways again. This is about trying to understand what career pathways exist now, is that?
Yes, and approving whatever a new career pathway is. Someone could bring that to you and say, hey, here's what we determined as a career pathway for LPN, for example, which I believe already exists. Let's just say that we could approve it and say it's an official career pathway.
Is there any, and I'm sorry, Heather's left, but is there any assistance out there for either sectors or organizations trying to create career pathways?
I would have to ask Heather, but I can get back to you on that. I don't know.
Because I'm thinking that's another need. It's great to know what exists, but like I'm working with a group of fiber broadband cable installers who definitely want to create a career pathway from CTE to this work, to an apprenticeship program or something. And they're looking to us as the higher ed institution to help make that happen. It's like, well, this isn't what we do.
Yeah.
And so there is a sort of a.
So to answer that, kind of, step one of this may basically be like, what's already out there? Is it up to date? Does it make sense still? Step two would be, let's look at Vidal and McClure Foundation put together the in-demand jobs, I believe, for the next 10 years. And saying, okay, what's missing? We have these career pathways, but like there's these 10 jobs that don't have one. So we should probably figure out who wants to make those, who cares about those for the entities and get them in the room to make sure that they develop those career pathways. And then also promoting them and marketing them. I think that needs to start at like the 8th grade level and go throughout someone's path, like lifetime, so that they understand this is kind of how you get up the ladder. I think for a lot of people, they might understand intuitively that if you'd like to be a CEO of a company, you got to start at a certain level and you work your way up, but they might not necessarily understand that in manufacturing. They might not understand that in healthcare. They may not understand that in certain ways. And so I think that's really what we're looking to do. But if you do know folks trying to develop a career pathway, I would have them get in touch with the Career Pathways Committee and also AOE who do a lot of this work. So next steps, Career Pathways Committee will start the reviewing of existing career pathways. Training and Credentialing Committee will begin reviewing the plans of the last working group, and we will begin planning for our first education and training provider meeting in 2024. Yes, I know.
I think this is another example of just the regional. So we've got our career pathways pipeline program.
It's connected to local employers, the career center, that advisory committee. So it's one of those things where it should largely.
So last and not least, size and quality of the workforce. Yeah, that's the, I think it's relatively quickly. So 5.1, facilitate the collaboration and effective recruitment and retention strategies. Increase marginalized population participation in the workforce. 5.3, develop a statewide New American support network, and 5.4, increase the enforcement participation rate. So the facilitate and collaboration of effective recruitment and retention strategies. The purpose of this is to provide coordination to many different entities trying to recruit newer runners to the state. We talked about this a little bit earlier, RDCs, RPCs, figuring out where this work is going really well, where it's not going really well, what are the best practices, how to get those folks at the regional level to the table to make sure that they are able to get more and more people to the state. Increase marginalized populations participation in the workforce. This, we're starting at the state of Vermont level, like as an employer. And going through that, we developed this with the Office of Racial Equity. Susanna Davis, I knew had the pleasure of working with her. She's exceptional. And talking about some of the key components, which is awareness, recruitment and retention, and then continuous improvement in those processes. So starting by trying to get more diverse populations, more underrepresented populations in our state of Vermont workforce. This is my favorite. This has been my baby this year, getting us through the legislative session. We've through the legislature, received a $200,000, well, not yet.
You know somebody though, so probably.
You know that.
I would say this is not a point of contention between the legislature and the governor, so I don't, regardless of what happens, this will probably not end the chopping block. And compared to some of the federal money, I think $200,000 feels like pocket change to people these days, even though it's not. But the purpose of this would be working with a contractor, similar to actually what we're doing with SWDB, to develop a statewide network for relocating new Americans. The key functions in this were, one, the process is just super disjointed. BDCC does like an exceptional job at getting new Americans in the state and connecting them, like figuring out what the barriers are, how to get them connected. We want to do some of that work and help it empower regions to do that better. Working in tandem with the $1 million we gave to our refugee resettlement office that gives them a little bit more flexible funding. But also figuring out how to demystify the visa process for employers, because it's very complicated for them, but a lot of folks actually would like to hire foreign labor. But also understanding how to kind of make those connections statewide, and so that we can understand what we need, what the gaps are, what we need to do next. So that's really exciting. That comes to the board, and that'll be something that the legislature will be looking for us to deliver on. So I'm very excited to get to work on that. And then last but not least, we'll be looking at labor force participation rate and unemployment rate. Different populations fall behind in these categories, figuring out based on data yearly or every couple of years what populations are falling behind, and determining strategies that might help us get them into the get them more engaged in the labor force, and presenting those to our state agencies, to the governor. So next steps, relocation recruitment committee is going to work with staff to develop an RFP and select a vendor to oversee the New American Support Network. The policy committee, they're very busy. We'll start beginning to convene to discuss labor force participation rates of disengaged populations. And we will continue to meet regularly with the Office of Racial Equity and start planning our radar meetings, which are talked about in our first section. So things to look for from us. As I mentioned, if you all vote to approve this plan today, this was not the work. It was a lot of work, but it was not the work. The work is actually what happens in the committee meetings and actually happens next. We're very excited to get to that point instead of just the planning phase. So we'll obviously release an official strategic plan. Committees will have their summer meeting schedule sent out. County tours will be sent out. We will continue to have Friday office hours if you want to spend your Friday mornings with us. We will do kind of an end of summer recap in August, likely, of what work was done over the summer, what's going to happen at the next meeting. And then, as I mentioned, a bylaw change that would enable us to have a set timeline of reviewing and updating the strategic plan. So I will take any questions.
all of these, I think, will have key performance indicators, right? How do we define success? Success. Where do you see the development of the actual indicators for each of these strategies coming into play?
So in each of.
Is it the milestone?
Yes. So that's why we wanted to make it. Again, I guess why we made this very for the board, and not for the workforce system. If this was the workforce system, we would say we increased the labor force by 10,000 people. For the board, if we hit what we said we were going to do in these things with the hopes of increasing without a losing number of 10,000 new workers.
If there's no other questions, next.
Jess Bittner wanted to chime in. See if this works. Should we get on?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
He's back with the SEI on that bridge.
Oh.
Hold on, Jess, we couldn't hear you. We might need to start over.
Can you hear me now?
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to chime in and just thank both you, Tori and Abby, for all of your work. As someone who has done a little bit of work in this space when I was with the Department of Labor, I know how I just know how much work it was, and you guys have both done such an incredible job, and I really commend you for it and for kind of setting the vision so clearly. I think that was one thing, that's previously been missing for the board, and you two have really brought that. So I again, I'm not chiming in to say just to commend the both of you. So thank you guys both so much for all of this and all of the work of all of the committees as well. But this has been really great.
Thank you, Jess. Other questions? Give anyone from the teams meeting a chance to weigh in if they'd like to. Hearing none, are we comfortable with calling a vote?
There's a motion. Motion to approve the State Workforce Development Board Strategic Plan 2023. Is there a second? Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Congratulations.
Thank you all so much.
We have other business in the public comment?
I think approving,
We didn't approve last.
we did skip right over that.
Yeah, so
That's amazing, which are in your folders.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, so moved, second, thank you, Joyce. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And then it's passed.
Great. All right, well, we appreciate you all being here today. I know that it's a lot of effort to come in and drive to Waterbury. We do have sandwiches from Red Hen for all of you, so please eat the food, feel free to hang out with our we do a lot of great things for Red Hen, so help yourselves. Thank you.